We know less about the ocean depths than we do about the moon. Hidden beneath the salty darkness are traces of vanished civilizations, ships, and unexplained phenomena, mysterious sounds, sourceless lights, voices from the void. All 40 stories are based on real facts and anomalies with no official explanation. Some are recent, others seem to come from another reality. A lost cry beneath the Antarctic ice. In December 2001, a team of New Zealand researchers working at Scott Base Station detected a strange acoustic signal emanating from deep within the Ross ice shelf. The equipment triggered during the night. It was a single, piercing sound that lasted less than 2 seconds, but left the impression of someone screaming beneath a thick layer of frozen ocean. The signal didn't match any known source, not drifting ice flows, not fissures, not even animals. Its frequency profile resembled a human voice, only distorted as if it had passed through a kilometer of water and icy pressure. Researchers attempted to track the source, but data from different stations didn't match. The signal seemed to be emanating from several points at once, moving along an unpredictable trajectory beneath the ice. There were no repeat activations. Only once, 8 months later, in the same area, seismic sensors recorded a surge of vibrations, as if someone or something had struck the bottom of the glacier with furious force. The data was sent to Washington. Several bioacoustics experts conducted an independent analysis. One of them, Professor Stephen Hargrave, made an unusual suggestion. He claimed that certain fragments of sound resembled the frequency pattern of a newborn baby's cry, only in a distorted, stretched form, as if the cry were transmitted through years, ice, and pressure. The media never learned of this. The official report attributed the anomaly to an unidentified geophysical shift, but a strange, oppressive silence remained within the expedition team. One of the researchers admitted years later that after the signal, he had been haunted by dreams of a man standing beneath the ice. He couldn't speak, only stared up through the frozen water at the icy dome above him. Occasionally, he pounded on the ice from within. On one of the slides taken with an infrared camera at a depth of 600 meters, a dark, round spot was later noticed. It moved. Then it disappeared. It could have been nothing. An obstacle, a shadow, a random error. But among polar explorers, a legend arose about a subglacial prisoner, a creature trapped in a past geological era, cut off from time. In recent years, strange noises have begun to be detected in this area again. But the most alarming thing is that each of them almost exactly matches the spectrum of that very signal from the recent past. Only now, they have become more frequent and seem to be moving closer to the surface. The missing squadron in the depths of the Black Sea. In July 1999, an international team of archaeologists led by Professor Michael Emerson began a deep-sea exploration of the northwestern shelf of the Black Sea. The goal was to locate ancient ships from the Greek colonial era. However, at a depth of more than 800 meters in a completely oxygen-free zone, they encountered something that completely went beyond the limits of known maps and logic. 20th century warships. All were of the same type. All were unmarked. As the research vehicle descended closer, the cameras captured 9 metal hulls covered in a thin layer of silt and marine microorganisms. Not a single hole. Not a trace of corrosion. Only complete, deathly silence. As if the ships had been submerged not centuries ago, but just a few weeks. Soviet and Turkish naval records contain no information about losses of this magnitude in this sector, not during the Cold War, nor before. These vessels were not listed in any registers. They were not recorded by anyone. They simply did not exist. 2 weeks after the discovery, contact with the underwater probe was suddenly lost. The last image transmitted before everything went dark was a shadow passing over the hull of the outermost ship. It moved too slowly for a marine creature and was too linear, too mechanical. Navigational failures soon began. The GPS would lag for several minutes, displaying a cursor where the vessel no longer was. Electronic compasses would deviate by tens of degrees. One of the operators later compared it to the sensation of discovering something underwater that shouldn't be there. Professor Emerson decided to temporarily curtail the research, fearing unforeseen risks. But one night before returning to port, one of the team members reported seeing a moving object on the radar, the silhouette of a ship, disappearing and reappearing like a hologram. It was moving toward the squadron, but each time they attempted to approach, the signal disappeared. Later, when analyzing the archives, it was discovered that in the same area in 1944, a massive radio jamming event had been recorded, causing an entire detachment of Soviet torpedo boats to go off course and disappear without a trace. They were never found. Official reports attributed the incident to a storm, but the coordinates matched almost perfectly. Today, this area is marked on maps as a silent zone. No one grants permission for further dives. No country officially recognizes the ownership of these ships. And in local fishing villages, they say that sometimes, in calm weather, you can hear a sound like a metallic fleet moving across the water. But no one sees it. Unmanned floating submarines. In the spring of 2017, the American research vessel Aurora Aegis, while conducting underwater mapping in the Bering Sea, received an unexpected signal from an unknown object. It surfaced almost vertically, having passed from a depth of more than 3 kilometers in a matter of minutes. As the vessel approached, it turned out that on the surface was a metal hull, strongly reminiscent of a military submarine from the Cold War. However, no identification system confirmed its identity. Neither the US, nor Russia, nor China, no one recognized the vessel. There were no numbers, markings, or names on the hull. The hatches showed signs of corrosion, but the hull was almost intact. The vessel looked too intact to have lain on the seabed for decades. The team launched a research drone to inspect its interior. The officers' quarters were empty. The communications bay had been dismantled. There were no bodies or traces of human presence in the living quarters. It looked as if the crew had simply left. Even the galley held sealed aluminum containers of canned food. A cracked map lay on one of the tables. But as the drone approached, it turned out it had been drawn not with ink, but with something resembling copper oxide. The mystery deepened when a date was discovered inside the engine compartment. The marking on the nameplate read 1983. But according to archives, no submarine with such technical parameters was produced that year, in any country. 3 days later, the vessel disappeared. It simply sank underwater at night. No sound, no signals, no splashes. The cameras installed on the Aurora Aegis didn't record the moment of its descent, only its absence at 4 a.m. After that, strange things began to happen in the area. Digital clocks began to lag, the seawater showed temperature fluctuations, and GPS signals disappeared within an 8-mile radius. This wasn't an isolated incident. 2 months later, a similar submarine surfaced off the coast of South Korea and disappeared again. In 2020, another one surfaced off the coast of Chile. All the objects had similar designs, the same silence, and a complete absence of human traces. Some theories suggest this is the result of Cold War-era experiments, when submarines could be programmed for long-term autonomous behavior. However, no former military engineer has confirmed the existence of such protocols. Another version is more frightening. In 1983, according to declassified data, contact was lost in the Bering Strait with an experimental Soviet submarine tasked with a mission in a zone of anomalous geomagnetic shift. It was never found. But the signal recorded in 2017 is almost identical to the one transmitted seconds before its disappearance. The question remains, who raises these submarines? Is it silt? And do they rise on their own? Glass balls on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. In June 2021, a team of oceanographers from the California Institute of Technology conducted deep-sea scanning in the area of the East Pacific Rise, a tectonic zone where the ocean floor rises hundreds of meters above the basin. The goal was to conduct geological measurements and collect mineral samples. But at a depth of approximately 4,000 meters, the cameras recorded something that defied explanation. On a flat, level section of the seabed, where there should have been nothing but solidified lava and sedimentary layers, lay dozens of perfect glass spheres. Transparent, smooth, and almost uniform in size, about 8 centimeters in diameter. They weren't buried or covered in silt, as if they'd been placed recently. And what's especially strange is that they were arranged in a perfect grid, evenly spaced, as if someone had placed them by hand. Scientists were certain this was impossible. At such depths, the pressure should have instantly crushed the fragile glass. But the spheres remained intact, unharmed. Some were completely transparent, while others had a strange shimmer or bubbles inside that moved despite the absence of currents or vibrations. When the drone attempted to grab one of the spheres with its mechanical arm, the signal suddenly began to falter. The camera jerked, distorting the image. Within seconds, the system shut down completely, and it was only 20 minutes later that it was restarted. This time, the spheres were no longer there. They were all gone. The team decided to repeat the descent, but over the next 3 days, they were unable to find a single trace. Even the coordinates recorded during the first dive didn't match the terrain upon rechecking, as if the terrain itself had changed. When the footage was brought ashore, distortions also appeared in the recordings. Some sections of the video were cut out, even though the cameras were continuously recording to separate drives. One of the camera operators claimed to have heard a humming sound within the recording, as if something were resonating inside the sphere. Some hypothesized that these could be the remains of ancient measuring instruments, supposedly left by an unknown civilization. Others suggest that this is a phenomenon related to extreme thermal gradients, where quartz can take on a spherical shape. But none of these theories explain why the spheres moved, disappeared, and were not recorded in any other way. In 2022, a Chinese vessel also lost contact with an underwater drone in the same area. They later claimed to have captured a strange, refracted object resembling a lens on the camera. The device was permanently disabled. Today, this sector is marked as Zone G on unofficial research maps. Official science remains silent. But those who saw the footage of those spheres no longer consider the ocean to be just water and rocks. There's something there. Something that's watching. Sand spiral in the Mozambique Channel. In 2003, the French satellite SAR-Air Tri detected a strange geometric formation on the bottom of the Mozambique Channel, between the east coast of Africa and Madagascar. At first, it was dismissed as a technical glitch. The image seemed too clear. But after a second survey from another orbiter, it became clear. At a depth of about 2.5 kilometers, right on the seafloor, there was a gigantic spiral extending toward the center in a precise logarithmic arc. The structure's diameter exceeded 2 kilometers, and it was clearly not natural. Such perfect shapes are rare on the ocean floor, especially in a shifting, unstable zone subject to tides, currents, and sedimentation. But the spiral looked as if someone had carved it into stone. Sand ridges, perfectly laid out, like guides, and a central vortex, as if drawing water in. This was not a coral reef, not the trace of an underwater volcano. This was a form that only the mind can create in nature. An expedition from Cape Town attempted to localize the object. During the dive of the autonomous Valkyrie drone, an unusual drop in pressure was recorded despite the depth remaining constant. This meant one thing. The structure was either absorbing some of the water's density or forming a closed field within itself, causing distortions. As the drone approached the spiral, compasses began to rotate, and navigation data began to jump between two incompatible coordinates. On the third orbit, a strong acoustic pulse suddenly arose. The microphones picked up a short sound reminiscent of both a mechanical rattle and a low voice, seemingly coming from all directions. Then, one of the operators, an elderly technician with 30 years of experience, requested that the mission be aborted. He claimed to have heard a word in the noise, in an unfamiliar language, but with an intonation that still makes his blood run cold. After the drones returned to the surface, the entire cooling system failed, even though the water temperature in the region was no higher than 20 degrees Celsius. Black spots appeared on the Valkyrie 7's hull, signs of charring, as if the craft had briefly been exposed to a focused thermal beam. But most importantly, a clear imprint was discovered on its bottom, a semicircle with lines resembling a spiral. The data was sent to the Institute of Marine Anomalies in Paris. There, one of the fractal symmetry experts noticed that the spiral's shape exactly matched an ancient symbol previously discovered on Sumerian pottery. The spiral is a symbol denoting a gateway between streams. According to legend, it served as a navigational marker, but not on water, in the sky. When the information was passed on to UNESCO, an unexpected order followed: no further research in the area. A month later, Google Earth removed satellite images of the fragment, replacing them with murky water. But the image of the spiral had long since spread among specialists. In the coastal villages of Mozambique, this story has been told for generations. Fishermen avoid the central part of the strait, citing a legend about a motionless whirlpool. People say that on certain nights, when the wind blows from the north, the water begins to emit rhythmic pulsations. They are inaudible to the ear, but a vibration is felt, as if an alien frequency is awakening within the body. To this day, no model can explain how such perfect symmetry could have emerged underwater. But one thing is certain. At the center of the spiral lies a depression that cannot be measured. Laser ranging simply stops, as if the signal is absorbed. Within the confines of this geometry, there is no reflection. The case of the ocean mirror off the coast of Peru. In January 2015, the European Space Agency's Aquascan satellite recorded an anomalous reflection of sunlight from the ocean surface in the area between the coast of Peru and the Chincha archipelago. The image revealed a distinct spot about 9 kilometers in diameter, which looked as if the ocean in that spot had turned into a mirror. Absolutely smooth, sparkling, with a geometrically perfect reflection. This was impossible. The weather in the region at the time was windy, with moderate waves and high humidity. No known natural factor could have created such a flat surface. For 5 days, satellites recorded the return of this glint every day at precisely 13 Jasser local time, always in the same location. Afterward, the phenomenon disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Intrigued by the anomaly, the University of Lima sent a small expedition of oceanographers and physicists there. However, upon approaching the area, they encountered an even stranger phenomenon. Echo sounders began to jam, as if something was absorbing the sound underwater. As the research vessel entered the glare's center of gravity, the water's surface suddenly became almost still, despite the wind. It wasn't a calm, it was an enforced calm. At a depth of 100 meters, the cameras captured something incredible. The surface of the water beneath the ship's hull reflected something different from what lay above. Instead of the sky and the ship's hull itself, the screen displayed a white void, as if the surface were casting not a reflection into the depths, but a distorted alternative to reality. The operator, who was watching in real time, later admitted to feeling intense internal dizziness and a strange pressure in his ears, as if he were suddenly changing altitude. The video, which was then carefully analyzed in the lab, revealed another oddity. For 10 seconds, a dark spot appeared in the lower left corner of the image. It moved in a straight line, not like a fish, not like a shadow, but like something resembling a camera watching back. After returning to shore, 3 crew members experienced identical symptoms: insomnia, headaches, severe anxiety, and vague dreams in which they were back on board the ship, but looking in a mirror and seeing a hand reaching out from the depths. All the descriptions matched each other down to the last detail, although they only began discussing the dreams among themselves weeks later. Locals living along the coast knew about this phenomenon long before satellites. They call it the Devil's Mirror. According to their beliefs, at this point, water ceases to be part of the human world and briefly becomes a window into something that shouldn't reflect light. Some claim to have seen silhouettes rising from the water on such days, but they cast no shadows. Others believe it's an ancient passage to an underwater civilization, blocked for centuries. In 1977, the research bathyscaphe Condor was reported missing in the same area. It went diving and vanished without a trace, without a signal, without wreckage. The vessel escorting it detected a strange flash before its disappearance, not a flash of light, but rather the disappearance of all light around it. This story was long considered a cold case, but the coordinates of the disappearance almost exactly match the area of the mirror spot. Since then, no official study has been undertaken. Satellite data from 2016 and 2017 has been edited, and Google Maps displays a murky patch of water in this area without permission. The ocean mirror no longer appears before the instruments, but in some storms, when the water freezes for a moment before a new wave hits, you can sometimes see a flash, just below the horizon, slightly brighter than usual. And if you look down at that moment, the reflection isn't necessarily yours. SOS signals from sunken ships decades later. In October 2013, the Royal Navy's Radio Surveillance Service detected a short radio signal on frequency 500 kilohertz, the standard maritime emergency channel, which was officially decommissioned in 1999. The signal came from the southwest Atlantic, near the Bermuda Triangle. It was an automated SOS message followed by the call sign Morrowfield. The problem is that the Morrowfield was a British cargo steamer sunk by a German mine in 1947. It lies at a depth of almost 3 kilometers, and no one suspected that its equipment could ever be reactivated. The vessel was considered a complete loss. The signal was followed by silence. However, 2 days later, in the same area, the American fishing vessel Shelia Mai reported that their radio had accidentally connected to an unauthorized channel, broadcasting a distorted voice, uttering unintelligible words against a background of heavy interference. One of the engineers recorded a fragment. Later, spectral analysis revealed that the voice contained a repeating phrase: "We are still here. It's hard for us to breathe." These incidents were not isolated. Over the next 3 months, similar signals were recorded in various parts of the ocean, from the South Atlantic to the Pacific. They all share the same frequency, the same Morse code structure, and the call signs of long-lost ships. These ships weren't simply sunk. They vanished without a trace, without wrecks, without bodies. Some experts suggested a hacker attack, designed to simulate old emergency signals. But radio experts stated that the code format, the transmission pattern, and even the variations in the rhythm of the dots and dashes were identical to those used on real telegraph keys from the mid-20th century. This was not a digital forgery. It was a mechanical source. In one case, in January 2014, hydroacoustic scientists at the U.S. National Oceanic Research Center attempted to localize the source of one of the signals associated with a ship named Cyclops. They used a network of deep-sea microphones and, to their surprise, detected a faint echo, which didn't rise from below, but moved parallel to the water. It was as if the transmitter wasn't on the bottom, but slowly drifting within the water column. But when an autonomous vehicle was sent out to search, it began to lose orientation and then completely failed. A few weeks later in the same area, a Norwegian ship reported visual contact. Early in the morning, the crew saw a ship of an old type, covered in rust, which was moving without an apparent power source. But when they tried to get closer, he vanished into the fog, as if he'd vanished into thin air. They wrote in their journal, "Disappearance without a splash, like a mirage, but too close to be an illusion." Some oceanographers are now putting forward a bold hypothesis. Under the influence of certain geomagnetic conditions or gravitational anomalies, time loops may exist in the ocean. Zones where a signal or even an object can become trapped and resurface decades later. In this case, SOS signals are not fakes. They are a belated cry for help, reaching through the wall of time. Since 2020, such signals have been increasingly rare, but no government has officially commented on these events. However, among old-school sailors, there's a new saying: if you hear a signal, don't follow it, because the one calling may not be the one who's alive. A pod of whales that disappeared in real time. In the spring of 2018, a team of researchers from the University of British Columbia tracked the migration of bowhead whales off the coast of the Aleutian Islands. For 2 weeks, 24 individuals, equipped with satellite trackers, reliably moved along a predetermined route, following the underwater current. Data was received in real time, and the entire pod appeared completely stable. But on May 14th, at 3 in the morning, all the transmitters simultaneously went dark. Not gradually, but instantly, in a single moment. The disappearance occurred at a point previously considered geophysically neutral. About 1.5 kilometers deep, no volcanic formations, stable magnetic fields, moderate water movement. It was an ordinary stretch of ocean. Until then. An hour later, one of the beacons activated again. It was sending a strange, distorted signal, as if the coordinates were jumping at intervals of 2 or 3 seconds, pointing to different points within a kilometer radius. The researchers suspected a malfunction, but over the following days, 2 more beacons activated with the same effect, an unstable, floating position, as if the object they were attached to were in several places at once. Deciding to check the area, the team aboard the research vessel Pelagia headed toward the coordinates of the last active signal. Upon arrival, they attempted to use sonar to search for animal tracks, but instead of the expected echoes from large bodies, the device detected weak but rhythmic pulses. Their frequency resembled a heartbeat, only several times slower. The sound seemed artificial, unrelated to any known marine creature. It repeated every 18 seconds without changing pitch, like a looped recording. One engineer compared it to an echo that forgot where it belonged. On the 3rd day in this area, the cameras of a drone lowered to a depth of 700 meters captured something even more frightening. For a split second, a shape flickered in the dense, murky water, resembling a whale's silhouette, only distorted, stretched, with bulges along its spine. The object moved without the characteristic tail movements, as if pulled by the current, but in a straight trajectory against the main current. At that same moment, one of the researchers in the monitoring compartment suddenly lost consciousness. After being hospitalized, he described a sensation as if his body had disconnected from space. He said that before losing consciousness, he heard a dull, single inhale, as if the entire ocean had momentarily sucked in air. 4 days later, all the beacons went silent completely. They could neither be found nor recovered. Not a single whale body was recovered. Not a single echo scanner detected any signs of pressure loss, blood leaks, or gas escaping, the signs usually associated with the death of such large animals. They simply vanished. Local fishermen hearing about the incident shared an old legend. They call this stretch of ocean the Dark Bandage. They say that every few years everything in this area comes to a standstill. No birds fly by, no fish are caught, and the water becomes still. One old man said that on such days, the ocean exchanges places with something else. A year later, a similar incident involving a school of mackerel was recorded in the same sector. Thousands of fish simultaneously disappeared from radar. The report called it abnormal migratory dispersion. But no one mentioned that at precisely the same moment, a weak pulse appeared again, every 18 seconds. Today, maps still mark this area as neutral. But the computers that recorded the disappearance of the 24 whales retained a strange 1-minute window of time during which no data was recorded. It was as if the minute itself had vanished. A huge metal plate on the bottom of the Bay of Biscay. In July 2016, the Spanish research vessel Artemisa conducted a series of geomagnetic scans in the central Bay of Biscay. The mission's initial goal was purely geophysical, monitoring the shifting of tectonic microplates and searching for new oil fields. However, one of the sensors detected a sharp and unexplained distortion of the magnetic field at a depth of approximately 3 kilometers. The device recorded a persistent rectangular anomaly, clearly distinct from the surrounding space. When a vehicle with video cameras and an echo sounder was lowered into the area, an object appeared before them that didn't fit into any known classification of marine formations. It was a slab, perfectly rectangular, approximately 120 meters long and about 30 meters wide. It lay on a flat area of the ocean floor and looked as if it had been placed there intentionally. The slab's surface was smooth, mirror-like, without any signs of corrosion or fouling, something impossible in a normal marine environment. Even after thousands of years, ancient debris is coated with marine organisms, silt, and algae. But there was not a single sign of life here. It was as if the slab repulsed biological presence. Moreover, its structure didn't match any known metal. Spectral analysis revealed that it reflected the entire visible spectrum of light, but didn't absorb it, distributing it along the edges. An underwater drone approaching within 5 meters began transmitting distorted images, as if the lenses inside the camera had shifted. A subtle shimmer appeared in the center of the image, a pattern that only emerged upon closer inspection. The team decided to scan the slab with a laser, but the device shut down on the first pulse. 15 seconds later, they managed to restart it, but the camera was no longer responding, and strange data was discovered in its memory. Among the entries were dozens of identical strings of symbols that didn't belong to any alphabet. They resembled both ancient Semitic and Devanagari, but not a single word made sense. That same evening, the captain of the Artemisa reported observing a strange glow beneath the surface of the water, directly above the coordinates of the plate. The light didn't originate from the depths, but seemed to diffuse beneath the surface, as if the water itself above the object were faintly glowing from within. When attempting to record the phenomenon, the cameras malfunctioned, ruining the footage. The next morning, the team decided to end the mission, but before leaving, the drone captured one last image. A thin, almost invisible crack ran along the edge of the slab, unnaturally smooth, like a laser cut. A flash of light erupted from it for a few seconds, after which the crack disappeared, and the surface became perfectly smooth again. Later, back in port, several crew members began complaining of strange sensations, motion sickness, an inability to concentrate, a feeling as if space were slipping. 3 began having recurring dreams in which they were falling, not downwards, but inward. One of the scientists, viewing slow-motion footage of the slab, claimed that it wasn't their camera that briefly appeared in the reflection, but something else, a silhouette with disproportionately long arms, standing in the water. Today, this location is not marked on maps. The vessel's official reports contain no information about the slab, but in an unofficial database of marine anomalies, the coordinates are recorded under a code. The few who have seen the original files are certain. This is not part of a sunken ship, not a meteorite, not an experiment. It is an entrance, or perhaps a lid. Acoustic tunnels under the Falkland Islands. In 2020, a group of scientists from the University of Southampton, while studying the behavior of waves and underwater currents in the Falkland Islands area, encountered a phenomenon that still has no convincing explanation. Using a network of hydrophones, they recorded noise profiles of the seafloor, expecting to detect standard sounds, water movement, the calls of marine mammals, the echoes of distant underwater eruptions. But a completely different type of signal emerged from the usual background noise. It was quiet but steady. The frequency was even, just at the edge of audibility. The sound resembled breathing, slow and cyclical, as if a vast living structure were drawing in and releasing water somewhere deep beneath the surface. It continued uninterrupted even during storms and earthquakes, as if unaffected by the external environment. Intrigued, the scientists focused their equipment on the point with the strongest resonance and unexpectedly noticed that the sound changed depending on the angle at which the microphone approached it. This meant one thing. It wasn't a pinpoint sound, like that of an animal or a crack, but rather came from some extended structure. Indeed, when constructing an audiographic model, it became clear. Beneath the Falkland Islands, at a depth of approximately 1,300 meters, runs a system of parallel sound channels, long, stable, like tunnels. The main cavity was over 9 kilometers long, with branches extending toward the eastern shelf. It all resembled a system of artificial pipes, but no underwater rock allows for the formation of such straight, stable structures. Instruments aimed deeper began to lose depth. Laser rangefinders drifted off to infinity, as if the beam encountered no resistance. The researchers then decided to deploy an autonomous drone. It was lowered on a tether with a range of 1.5 kilometers. After 800 meters, visibility deteriorated sharply. First, the image became grainy. Then black spots appeared. And then an unusual distortion occurred, as if the light itself were bending around the lens. But the worst part was that the drone began moving on its own. Not up, not down. It seemed to be being pulled to the side, along a trajectory that didn't align with the direction of the cable. It was as if it were entering an invisible current, a current that, according to physics, didn't exist. After 7 minutes, the cable tightened, and the team was forced to retrieve the drone. When they recovered it, the outer skin was frost cold, despite the normal water temperature. Malfunctions began to occur on board the vessel. The autopilot stopped responding to commands, the compass needle froze, and satellite communications began showing coordinates 600 kilometers to the east. Everything returned to normal only after leaving the tunnel zone. Returning to base, the scientists superimposed the trajectories of these underwater resonances on historical maps. They were astonished to discover that at least 17 ships had vanished almost exactly along the line of the 19th century tunnels, all without a trace. Some were even visually detected by other vessels an hour before their disappearance. They were called swallowed by the fog. According to local fishermen's folklore, these waters contain a sea route without sky. They say that if you turn off the engine, you can hear a crunching, dull sound beneath the keel, as if the ground were shifting underwater. And sometimes, if you listen long enough, the sound begins to mimic your breathing, but with a delay, as if something below is listening back. Today, no one officially speaks about these tunnels. They're called an anomaly, an error, a noise. But researchers who have visited the area are certain that something exists beneath the Falkland Islands that reflects sound inward, not outward. And perhaps someone has been walking through them for a long time. Lights under the ice of Greenland. In February 2021, a group of scientists from the Danish Polar Research Institute conducted satellite monitoring of glacier movement in northeastern Greenland. Among the standard infrared data, they unexpectedly discovered an anomaly. Beneath a mass of multi-year ice, more than a kilometer thick, a faint but persistent glow appeared. It didn't flicker, didn't change shape, and didn't move. It simply glowed from within. At first, this was attributed to a thermal emission, or a defect in the filming, but a repeat observation revealed the same thing. Moreover, the glow appeared at exactly the same time, and only during the new moon. This ruled out any influence from the sun or temperature. Then the scientists decided to use a sub-ice probe developed for Arctic missions. It uses targeted vibration pulses to shine through the ice. When the sensors reached the required depth, the probe recorded a sharp temperature jump, just 2 degrees, enough to initiate slow melting under a kilometer of ice. However, the graph showed that the warming was occurring not around the surface, but from within. It was as if the heat source was directly beneath the probe. Then the probe began transmitting audio data. A distinct rhythm appeared in the vibration spectrum. 3 short pulses, a pause, then 1 long one, and then again. The signal was too stable to be random. It continued for the full 18 minutes, then ceased simultaneously with the disappearance of the light. A week later, the expedition delivered drilling equipment by helicopter to collect ice samples. But at a depth of 900 meters, the drill jammed. A thin column of light was visible on the observation screen, rising through the crystals, as if someone or something had been activated by pressure, and then the malfunctions began. The communication devices began working in reverse, transmitting signals not from the surface downwards, but as if receiving data from the bottom up. One of the operators heard a short, moaning sound in his headphones. Not mechanical, not animal-like. He described it as a dull, 1,000-year-old voice. The team decided to suspend drilling and retreat, but before departing, they planted a recorder on the ice surface. 3 days later, it recorded what would later lead to the mission's demise. On the night of the new moon, the recorder recorded a repetitive noise emanating from beneath the ice. In the sped-up recording, it was clearly audible as it gradually grew louder and began to form something resembling speech, but not human speech. The repetitions of the sounds were not chaotic, but rather as if someone were reproducing phonetic forms, until the recording suddenly stopped. The next day, all that remained at the recorder's location was a depression in the snow and a perfectly smooth, scorched circle about 2 meters in diameter. No debris, no plastic, no wires, just ice, as if stretched outward, like a reverse eruption. Local hunters from the sparse Greenlandic settlements avoid this area. According to their legend, something sleeps beneath this ice that must not be awakened. They call it Ankluvak, the one who breathes from below. They say that sometimes you can see the sky is empty of stars if you stand directly above it, as if part of the sky is deaf. Since then, satellites have no longer detected any light. But sensors installed within a 100-kilometer radius increasingly detect strange acoustic shocks in the ice, as if someone from within is testing the thinness of its surface. The sunken road between Cuba and Yucatan. In 2001, a Canadian communications company laying fiber optic cables between Cuba and Mexico accidentally detected something using echolocation that was then thought to be a technical error. At a depth of more than 600 meters between the Yucatan Peninsula and the northern coast of Cuba, sensors have detected rows of symmetrical objects arranged with unusual regularity. The team sent a remotely operated vehicle with a camera to the coordinates. After 3 hours of video streaming, it became clear. Structures resembling ruins lay on the bottom of the strait. Not chaotic debris, but stone formations laid out in straight lines. One was particularly striking. A road about 40 meters wide, extending inland to the southwest and disappearing beyond visibility. The road had clear curbs, and along its edges were visible rows of rectangular blocks, like the remains of buildings or colonnades. Some stones were covered in engravings, barely visible due to the thickness of silt and algae. But upon closer inspection, patterns emerged reminiscent of symbolism found in both pre-Columbian Mesoamerica and early Sumerian culture, as if someone had blended two worlds separated by millennia and oceans. Scientists who learned of the discovery initially assumed it was a natural formation, but the shape of the slabs, the angle of the corners, and the direction of the road ruled out a natural origin. Moreover, the road was located at a depth where land could only have existed more than 10,000 years ago, long before the advent of known civilizations. Later, archaeologists, oceanographers, and even representatives from UNESCO joined the study. But just as global scientific attention began to grow, a diplomatic conflict suddenly ensued. Cuba refused to provide coordinates, citing sovereign rights to the seabed. The research was curtailed. However, private sources claim that in the 2 years following the discovery, several independent expeditions attempted to reach the site. Some returned with video footage showing massive steps descending at a sharp angle, as if the road descended into an underwater crevice. Others vanished without a trace. One of the captains, speaking anonymously, reported that during the descent to the structures, his crew began experiencing bouts of disorientation. Navigation instruments began showing different directions, and compasses began spinning. And cameras set for nighttime recordings recorded a faint phosphorescent glow emanating from cracks between the slabs. Locals on the coast of Cuba have known about this place for ages. The elders call it the Road of Silence. They believe it leads to a sunken city abandoned by those who came from the sky. Not literally, but from above, from a time before time. In 2003, one of the engineers, after leaving the company, published an open letter claiming that one of the drone's recorded files showed a figure standing at the edge of a road, on the edge of a crevasse. It was indistinct, blurry, but didn't resemble an animal. It was vertical, with a disproportionately long neck and arms hanging below the waist. After publication, the video disappeared from the internet. The account was deleted. The engineer's name disappeared from records. Today, the road between Cuba and Yucatan officially doesn't exist. Not on any map, not in any report. But high-resolution satellite images taken before 2004 continue to surface in classified archives. They reveal a nearly perfect line. It begins in the void and extends into the depths. There's only one question. If it was a road, who traveled it? And where? Dead zones where bodies do not rot. In 2012, Japanese researchers from the Oceanographic Agency discovered a strange pattern while surveying shipwrecks off the coast of Osaka. Among numerous wrecks at a depth of approximately 900 meters, they stumbled upon an old wooden boat, presumably from World War II. Inside was a human body, and it hadn't decomposed. Under normal conditions, marine life breaks down organic matter in a matter of weeks. This is especially true in warm, oxygen-rich waters. But here, the body, its shape, its tissues, its skin structure, was almost perfectly preserved. It hadn't mummified, hadn't turned into a skeleton, hadn't become covered in algae. It simply froze. Initially, this was written off as a coincidence, but in subsequent years, similar discoveries were recorded in at least 8 regions, from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. They had one thing in common. They were all located within narrow areas, no more than 200 meters wide, which oceanographers later dubbed dead zones. The term's meaning was ironic. In these zones, not only was there no decomposition, there was no life at all. No microorganisms, no bacteria, no plankton. The water was clean, clear, and completely sterile. And most importantly, it was completely devoid of oxygen. Theoretically, such zones are possible under rare and extreme conditions, but their existence in stable waters and at such depths is inexplicable. No thermal activity, volcanic emissions, or tectonic faults have been detected within the zones. They simply exist, like pockets of absolute silence amidst a living sea. In 2016, such a zone was discovered off the coast of Namibia, containing 3 bodies. They appeared to belong to fishermen who had disappeared 2 years earlier. Their boat sank during a storm and they had not been heard from since. But their remains were virtually unchanged. Their eyes, skin, even the fabric of their clothing appeared as if time had stood still. They were brought to the surface for examination. Immediately after their recovery, the bodies began to rapidly deteriorate, as if the environment suddenly remembered what was about to happen. Within 48 hours, the tissue had turned into a mushy mass, and all the internal organs had disintegrated simultaneously. Scientists working with water samples from these zones noted something odd. Despite the lack of oxygen, a faint vibration was detected. It wasn't detected by echo sounders, but it did cause a subtle tremor in the instruments. When recorded with microphones, a dull, pulsating noise, reminiscent of distant breathing, was heard in the water. Some researchers are convinced that these aren't dead zones, but rather capsules of sorts, spaces in which something is stored. It doesn't deteriorate, it doesn't disappear. It's as if the ocean takes something and places it in a vacuum, like an exhibit or like a hostage. In 2018, an international expedition attempted to delineate the boundaries of one such zone in the Caribbean Sea. Upon crossing the designated line, 2 drones began experiencing malfunctions. Their navigation systems froze, the temperature dropped sharply, and their cameras began producing negatively exposed images, as if they were capturing not light, but the absence of it. After 4 minutes, both devices ceased transmitting. A day later, one of them surfaced, undamaged but with its memory completely erased. The video files were replaced by noise, a uniform gray field, no image, no sound. Only at the very beginning of the file was there a frame, fog, and a silhouette. Today, no one knows why these zones appear. They don't move, don't grow, don't disappear. They simply exist, and within them, everything remains, even death. Moving islands in the Pacific Ocean. Since the late 19th century, reports of mysterious islands that appear and disappear like mirages have circulated among the Pacific archipelagos. Old ship logs contain references to lands that weren't on the map yesterday and won't be tomorrow. These reports were long dismissed as the inventions of sailors suffering from sunstroke or hallucinations. But in October 1997, the American military satellite Kronos 5, passing over the South Pacific, detected the formation of a new landmass in an area previously filled with water. It was a dark, oval-shaped mass of land about 400 meters long. It lasted just under 9 hours before disappearing completely. Images showed the island seemingly melting, not due to the action of waves, but slowly dissolving into the water, leaving behind a thin line of foam. The next day, the satellite again detected the same formation, but 80 kilometers to the southeast. The contours were identical. vegetation was zero. The surface texture was smooth, as if unaffected by erosion. Later, in 2002, a research team from New Zealand headed to the area where the twin island was supposedly located. They saw it from a helicopter, a patch of dark land with low rock formations. But when they attempted to land, something strange happened. The compasses jammed and the altimeter began showing a descent, even though the helicopter remained level. The last 5 frames of the expedition's video showed the island's surface slowly beginning to distort. The rocks seemed to shift, melt, and lose their shape. After 3 minutes, the image faded. The helicopter returned, but failed to land. Locals of the Kermadec Islands call this phenomenon the living island. They believe it's a creature from the depths, taking the form of land to lure those seeking shelter. They say that once every few years, the island rises to breathe. In 2015, a team of oceanographers from the vessel Nereus used a drone to map the seafloor in the suspected zone of shifting islands. At a depth of about 1,000 meters, the instruments detected a strange formation, like a huge moving plate covered in a porous structure. It slowly pulsated. The echo sounder signal returned with a rhythmic tremor, and the water temperature above the object was 2 degrees higher, despite the depth. Some scientists have hypothesized the existence of a giant biological organism capable of projecting part of its body, mimicking an island. Similar to mushrooms, whose fruiting bodies grow only for reproduction, the island could be merely a part of an unknown creature hidden beneath the ocean. And then something happened that silenced everyone. In 1921, a private satellite belonging to the Marinex Scientific Initiative took a photo of the supposed island. But when the image was processed, it turned out that the shadow it cast on the water didn't match the island's shape. It was larger, wider, and clearly had the outlines of a huge body covered in shields. Today, no official source confirms the existence of these moving islands. They don't appear on maps, and their coordinates are unreliable. But an old Japanese sailing guide from the 19th century contains a handwritten entry. The island sank into the depths as if returning home. We were on it for 20 minutes. We heard it breathing. The missing message at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. In December 2009, the American submersible Erebus, designed for ultra-deep water exploration, reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench at a point known as Challenger Deep, the deepest recorded location on the planet. The primary mission was to collect sediment and study tectonic plates, but one of the cameras captured something never before seen in such an environment. At a depth of about 11 kilometers, a rectangular slab was visible in the sediment layer, unnaturally light in color, distinct in texture from the surrounding rock. It was about 2 meters wide and slightly less tall. Symbols were etched on its surface. They resembled no known script. Visually, they resembled cuneiform, but more elongated and angular. The camera captured exactly 7 lines, each symbol seemingly carved with mathematical precision. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that the lines were deeply etched, as if created not by a tool, but by a process that affected the very structure of the mineral. The operator gave the command to begin recording. For 3 minutes, the camera recorded every fragment. Then, interference. At first, faint, like static. Then, a discharge. The connection was lost. 12 minutes later, power was restored, but the slab was no longer visible on the screen. In its place, only a dent in the mud, as if someone had removed it, leaving a perfect niche. A dispute erupted on board the expedition. Some of the team insisted on a second descent. However, the decision was postponed due to equipment malfunctions and deteriorating weather conditions. Nevertheless, the remaining data from the first dive was sent to the analysis center. There, while studying the footage, another strange event occurred. The sequence of symbols from the slab, when printed at scale, began to destabilize the scanners. OCR programs froze, and optical filters were unable to produce a clear image. Finally, one expert suggested that the pattern was not writing in the usual sense, but rather a code, a sequence encoded into the geometry of the signs themselves. An attempt to decipher it yielded an unexpected result. When the image was run through a spectral analyzer, it created a rhythm. This rhythm precisely matched acoustic signals once recorded in the same area in 1997, mysterious infrasound pulses reminiscent of a heartbeat. From that moment on, everything went wrong. The decrypted file disappeared from the servers. The hard drive where the copy was stored began overheating while attempting to retrieve the data. One of the scientists processing it fell into a catatonic state. 8 hours after completing his work, he simply stopped responding to external stimuli. Later, he only repeated one phrase. "There's someone waiting there. There wasn't a message there. There was an answer." Since then, descents to the spot where the slab was discovered have ceased. Several attempts at reprobing resulted in equipment failure. Satellite images over the area suddenly began to record temporary zones of interference, where optics lose focus at altitudes above 11 kilometers. Today, official reports are silent. But in closed circles of oceanographers, the theory is being discussed that at the very bottom of the planet lies not just a stone with symbols, but a mechanism, a waiting key, or an impulse, or perhaps a presence. Those who saw the original footage claim that in the very center of the slab was an octagonal symbol, within which, at the millimeter level, visible only at extreme zoom, a spiral was visible. And if you rotated it, it led the gaze deeper and deeper, until it seemed as if the black abyss itself was staring back. A coral map that follows the outline of an ancient continent. In 2004, an oceanographic expedition jointly organized by the Australian Institute of Marine Biology and UNESCO surveyed deep-sea coral reefs in the Loiana archipelago between Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. The study was routine. Scientists recorded reef growth, biodiversity, and the impact of rising ocean temperatures. However, at a depth of 320 meters, the team stumbled upon an unusual formation. It had no distinctive shape or color, ordinary light pink corals partially overgrown with algae. But one of the operators noticed that the reef's structure resembled the outlines of a map, only not of a modern continent, but of something ancient. When they began comparing satellite images with fragments of the coral massif, it became clear. The reef was an almost exact replica of the continent that, according to some geologists, existed tens of millions of years ago, the so-called Lemuria. The coral patches coincided with supposed mountain ranges, valleys, and even, oddly enough, a riverbed, which perfectly matched the proposed hydrographic model of the sunken plateau. The question isn't how it got there. The question is why corals, living organisms with no intelligence, began to grow this way. Scientific models ruled out the possibility of such forms forming naturally. Growing corals respond only to currents, light, and temperature. They don't draw continents. The mystery deepened when a geological scanner revealed that beneath the reef layer lay a flat structure, not basalt or limestone. Its density was more like glass, or perhaps a silicon alloy. The team sent a probe with a microdrone capable of penetrating cracks. It penetrated the coral layer and began scanning the surface. One of the recordings revealed a trace, a seemingly burnt line running the entire length of the plate. Upon zooming in, it became clear that this line formed an inscription. However, the inscription was unreadable. The symbols resembled the symbols found in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, but with variations. While the team was analyzing, something strange happened. At night, the instruments recorded a slow change in the reef's shape. Sections simulating coastlines began to spread, as if living organisms were trying to renew their contours. However, the corals weren't destroyed. In fact, their growth accelerated exponentially. After 3 days, part of the drawing shifted, forming new contours. And then, the scientists realized that the reef wasn't simply copying the continent, it was changing along a timeline. The next shape resembled the hypothetical appearance of Lemuria a million years before its destruction. And then, even more ancient contours. This wasn't just a reef. It was a map, but not a geographical one, a temporal one. And if this sequence is to be believed, during the 5th stage, presumably corresponding to the rise of civilization, strange symmetrical structures appeared on the reef. Micro-uplifts forming networks, like cities. Thin ridges connecting nodes, like roads. And at the very center, a rounded coral mound where echolocation detected a cavity. The team decided to suspend their exploration, but before evacuation, one of the divers breaking protocol attempted to explore the cavity. He disappeared for 22 minutes. When he surfaced, he was silent, and he never spoke again. A thin, perfectly round mark, like a burn, was discovered on his neck, but there was no damage to the skin. Today, the loyal area is closed to research due to reef instability. But in the last satellite images taken before the ban, the shape of the corals had changed again. Now they resembled not a continent, but something else entirely. A shape resembling a fingerprint, as if someone had once placed a hand on the seafloor and the corals were still trying to replicate it. An unidentified object off the coast of Seattle that rises once every 6 years. Since the late 1980s, anomalous underwater pressure surges and the emergence of an unidentified object have been regularly recorded off the coast of Seattle in the Puget Sound region. Initially, these were thought to be measurement errors or the result of underwater earthquakes, but since 1995, the coincidences have become too precise to be coincidental. Every 6 years, with intervals of no more than 3 days, devices monitoring deep-sea fluctuations record a sharp rise in pressure, accompanied by a release of heat at a depth of about 1,100 meters. A few minutes later, something large rises to the surface. Too large to be an animal, but too perfectly shaped to be a piece of rock. The object was first spotted by the research vessel Marion in January 1995. That evening, around 8 o'clock, radar detected a large mass rising to a distance of 100 meters from the surface. The operator described it as a pulsating spherical body about 20 meters in diameter, covered in something like a metallic crust. The object then sank back to the bottom. The water remained warm for an hour, and all instruments recorded a brief spike in electromagnetic radiation. In 2001, 2007, 2013, and 2019, the bursts recurred. Each time, they occurred on roughly the same day, when the Earth was passing through aphelion, the point of its farthest distance from the Sun. This gave rise to theories about gravitational resonance, but the object's behavior didn't fit into geophysical theory. In 2013, the Washington Oceanographic Center joined the research. They used the Poseidon unmanned probe with high-definition cameras. During its descent, the probe reached a depth of 1,800 meters, and that's when contact was detected. A black spherical formation appeared on the screen, clinging tightly to the seafloor. Its surface wasn't smooth. It featured repeating structures, like carved channels, forming concentric patterns. The center of the object pulsated, as if processes were occurring within it. But the most peculiar thing wasn't the center of the object, it was the water around it. It was motionless. Not a single bubble, not a current. Even the equipment had stopped vibrating. As the probe attempted to approach, the cameras malfunctioned. The image disintegrated into white noise, and a second later, an infrasonic boom erupted. The crew heard it through the water, like a rumble reverberating through the ship's hull. The probe had to be urgently recovered. From then on, the object became known as the Sleeping M. A few years later, the attempt was repeated, but a day before the expected recovery date, all equipment suddenly shut down. Satellite phones were silent. The water in the Bay Area remained dark, as if murky, for an hour, although there were no storms or tides. That night, residents of the coastal town of Des Moines saw a glow over the bay. A vertical column of light extending from the water into the clouds, sourceless, shapeless, as if the air itself had ignited from within. When the instruments were restored, all clocks were exactly 9 minutes slow, as if time had stepped back a little. Today, deep-sea drilling is prohibited in the Bay Area. Commercial vessels are restricted from passing. The next lifting cycle is expected in July 2025. Some specialists are preparing, while others are leaving the project. Because in the last image of the seafloor, taken by the probe accidentally during a malfunction, the object was no longer round. It had opened up, and a hole had appeared in the center of its structure, a perfectly circular one. Too perfect. A fountain at the bottom of the Indian Ocean spewing fresh water. The Orion V research vessel, operating in the Indian Ocean as part of a program mapping underwater vents, discovered a phenomenon that has since troubled geologists and oceanographers. At a depth of approximately 2,900 meters, between the Chagos Archipelago and the Maldives, a powerful vertical jet of water was detected rising from the seabed. Such phenomena are known, so-called hydrothermal vents, where water heated by magma is ejected to the surface. But here, everything was different. The water temperature remained stable, just below freezing, and chemical analysis revealed the impossible. It was fresh, almost distilled, no salt, no impurities. No, the jet was first detected using echolocation, a sharp reflection signal from a vertical formation. As the probe descended closer, the camera recorded a strange phenomenon. The water seemed to flow in the opposite direction, not upward, but outward, as if being pushed out of the void. The bottom itself at this location was a dark funnel with perfectly smooth walls. There was no sediment, no trace of organic matter, only darkness and the jet of water emerging from it. A sample recovered from the depths confirmed that the liquid's composition showed no signs of marine origin. Moreover, the hydrogen isotope content indicated an incredible age of over 20,000 years. This meant that it was not part of the current cycle. Its source lay outside the known systems. An attempt to lower the probe deeper ended in failure. As it approached the crater, the camera emitted a brief flash of light as if a spotlight had flared, but inside the lens itself. The apparatus was immediately raised, and when it was opened, all internal data was reset. Only one file remained, an image of a series of concentric circles radiating toward the center. It was as if the probe had captured the structure of the water itself, layered and pulsating. The scientific community was divided. Some claimed it was a relic of a flooded underground lake trapped beneath a continental plate. Others insisted that no known geology could explain a constant, sustained stream of fresh water at such a depth. And then something alarming happened. A year later, satellite images began recording a sharp change in the color of the water within a 3-kilometer radius of the source. At first, it was barely noticeable shades of blue, then an almost milky halo, as if the water was becoming saturated with something. The team returning to Orion V discovered that the freshwater jet had grown. It was now rising higher, the pressure had increased, and, most importantly, a faint acoustic background had begun. Hydrophones picked up a barely discernible rhythm. 4 short pulses, a pause, then one long one, and then again. It repeated every 15 minutes. This same signal, as it later turned out, had previously been detected near a deep trench off the coast of South America, and at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. It's as if there's a connection between the points, or a network. Some experts have suggested that this isn't just a source, but part of a larger system, and the stream isn't a leak, but perhaps a message, or an adaptive mechanism. To this day, the fountain continues to function. It doesn't weaken, it doesn't disappear, it simply gushes from the darkness, from a motionless, soundless vortex, like a signal from the past. And if the structure of the water is to be believed, it gushes 10,000 years ago, and perhaps it gushes before anyone on the surface uttered their first word. The Neptune 94 signal recorded at a depth where there are no instruments. In June 1994, a seismic station in the Mariana Trench recorded an anomalous sound that has remained one of the most inexplicable underwater mysteries ever since. It was recorded simultaneously by 3 independent observation points in Guam, Japan, and Hawaii. The signal emanated from below, not from the surface, not horizontally, but literally from beneath the ocean floor. It was given the codename Neptune 94. It lasted 8 seconds. Its structure was unusual for natural phenomena. It began with a sharp pulse, as if someone had struck metal under a thick layer of water. Then, a drop in frequency and a slow, almost electronic tremor. It ended, like a sigh. Dull, low, oppressive. At first, scientists speculated that it might be an underwater earthquake or a subsea collapse. But on that day, no tectonic movement was recorded within 1,000 kilometers. Moreover, there was no source. The signal couldn't have been picked up because no instrument capable of recording exists at the estimated depth, approximately 13 kilometers below sea level. It came from a zone considered geophysically dead. That is, no sound, energy, or light enters there. And even more so, nothing returns. Nevertheless, a file containing the recording existed. Its spectral analysis revealed something astonishing. The frequency modulation of the signal matched the shape of the human brain's echo profile during deep sleep, especially during disturbing dreams. Soon after its detection, the signal began repeating, first after 40 days, then after 35, then after 21. It became shorter, louder, and gradually began to shift northwest, toward the Kuril Islands. Oceanographers involved in the investigation discovered another oddity. During each signal, the water temperature at a depth of 5 kilometers increased by 0.1 degrees. This seemed insignificant, but given the volume, it represented a gigantic thermal release, equivalent to hundreds of underwater geysers, only without the steam. Later, in 2002, the Russian deep-sea vessel Yantar attempted to approach the signal's predicted trajectory. They didn't make it. 20 minutes after diving, contact was lost. The vessel surfaced on the 3rd day, undamaged, but the entire crew suffered from sleep disturbances, hallucinations, and sensations of a presence in the wardroom. All audio recordings made during the expedition were deleted, not by anyone, but by themselves. The hard drives overheated and froze. When opened, they were found to be clean. Only one retained a phrase, in binary code, later translated, "Don't descend below your breath." This phrase still sparks controversy, but everyone who heard the original recording of the Neptune 94 signal claims there is a rhythm to it. It's like a pulse, not technological, not natural. Like the breathing of a vast creature, immersed within the planet's depths. The signal hadn't been heard today since 2019. Its last pulse was detected with a frequency deviation. And this time, there was something new. A mirrored response, almost indistinguishable, was visible in the background, as if someone or something had responded. A wall in the depths of the Atlantic that extends beyond the horizon. In 2010, a joint European Science Council-NASA expedition scanning the mid-Atlantic ridge unexpectedly discovered a structure that defied any geological explanation. At a depth of more than 4.5 kilometers between the Azores and the Cape Verde archipelago, echolocation devices detected a straight line extending eastward. The line did not waver, break, or bend. It remained straight for tens of kilometers. At first, it was mistaken for a fault, but the angles formed by the surface turned out to be too regular, 90 degrees. Then it was assumed to be a crack in a tectonic plate. However, when data from an underwater probe was received, there was no doubt. It was a wall. The structure stood approximately 130 meters tall. Its width ranged from 6 to 8 meters. Its length at the time was 78 kilometers, longer than the Great Wall of China. And it continued onward toward a point where satellite data was lost due to optical distortion occurring over the region. Repeating segments were visible on the wall's surface, like blocks nested one inside the other. Their structure resembled a basalt monolith, but without the characteristic signs of lava solidification. No bubbles, no cracks, no signs of cooling. Moreover, the segments had been worked, or at least polished. The main thing is that no natural process explains how such a structure could have formed on the ocean floor. Neither water erosion nor volcanic activity can create a perfectly straight line extending to the horizon. When the expedition attempted to plot a route along the wall, equipment malfunctions began. Compasses stopped working, GPS disappeared, and the crew felt the ship begin to drift, even though data indicated it was completely stationary. One of the underwater probes lowered to the base of the wall detected something even stranger. The surface was emitting a faint heat, and every 12 meters a pulsation, as if some mechanism were operating within the structure. Not a single entrance, not a single crack, but every 12 meters, a faint vibrational response, repeating with an accuracy of tenths of a second. Scientists began to put forward theories, ranging from a sunken megastructure of an antediluvian civilization to a possible trace of extraterrestrial engineering. One of the researchers, Professor Gilles Molière, suggested that the wall is not a boundary, but an anchor, something fixing or holding in place an unknown space beneath the ocean floor. Further exploration was interrupted, officially due to equipment failure, unofficially because one day during the survey, the probe's camera recorded an object moving along the wall. It left no trace. Its shape was indistinct. But as it passed over a segment of the wall, the vibration disappeared. For a moment, then it returned. After returning from the expedition, 3 crew members left the project. One went to a monastery. The second changed his name and disappeared. The third recorded a video in which he said, "This isn't a wall. It's a lid. It's covering something. Or someone." The video was deleted an hour later. Today, most maps of the Atlantic don't show this structure, and the satellite data has been scrubbed. But 2 echogram files remain. They show a clear line perfectly separating the 2 types of seafloor. On one side, normal sediments. On the other, a seemingly scorched surface. Empty. Quiet. Too quiet. And it continues. Hundreds of kilometers, where even satellites can't track. A ship without a name. In July 2007, the crew of the French fishing vessel Clair de Lune, which was in international waters between South America and Africa, noticed a strange vessel on the horizon. It drifted without flags, without identification marks, with the edges of its upper deck charred and its lifeboats completely empty. The first thing that caught my eye was that it made no sound. Not a creak, not a slap of waves against its hull. It was as if the sea itself were avoiding it. Claire de Lune's crew approached within range and attempted to radio it, but there was no response. The captain then decided to move closer. As they approached, they saw that the ship's hull was steel, but not rusty. It looked as if it had been recently manufactured. However, judging by its design, it was a mid-20th century model. There wasn't a single person on board. No trace of the crew, no bodies, no personal belongings. Everything was in its place, but sterile. The rooms were empty. The cabins were spotlessly clean, as if someone had carefully removed every trace of their presence. The tables were empty. The holds were empty. The strangest thing was that there were no numbers, engravings, or nameplates. Even the propeller was smooth, without any factory markings. They attempted to tow the vessel by tying it to the Claire de Lune. Everything went smoothly until both vessels began to move. 3 minutes later, the cable suddenly tightened, as if something was holding the vessel from the other side. The French vessel's engines began to overheat, and the compasses went off scale. The captain decided to stop the tow. When they unhooked, the unknown vessel was motionless again. It didn't roll or sway, as if it were standing on solid support underwater. The Portuguese Coast Guard called to the scene, tried again 2 days later. Their ship, the Infanta Maria, deployed 2 drones with magnetic grippers, but as soon as the drones touched the hull, their signal disappeared. 10 minutes later, one of them surfaced. All its electronics had been burned out. The footage transmitted before the shutdown revealed only one thing. A barely discernible symbol had appeared on the ship's hull, previously unnoticed. Not a letter, not a number. Something resembling a geometric circle divided into 6 sectors. This gave rise to rumors. Some claimed the vessel was an experimental Cold War-era ship, abandoned in the ocean with some undisclosed purpose. Others said it was a duplicate of the British ship Beatrice, which disappeared in 1971 while transiting the Bay of Biscay. It was never found. A week later, the ship was spotted again, this time 600 kilometers further north, in a different part of the ocean. No storms or currents capable of carrying it away were detected. This time, it was spotted by satellite. By the time an expedition was dispatched, the ship was gone. Since then, 7 more sightings have been recorded, each time in a different location. Each time without a signal, without movement. Each time without signs of life. The most alarming event occurred in 2022. The American submarine Echo Station, located near Bermuda, suddenly detected a shadow above itself. The images showed the hull of a ship, the same one recorded in 2007. It drifted above the station for 20 minutes. Then, it disappeared. The unnamed vessel doesn't exist in the database. It's not recognized by any country. But one artifact remained aboard the Claire de Lune. The captain took something seemingly innocuous from the ship. A compass. It was black, with a brass rim. And since then, wherever they go, the needle always points east, even if they're heading due north. And the captain never sleeps. Because every time he does, he dreams of the same thing. The ship is in black water. And beneath it, not emptiness, beneath it, there are eyes. A life form found deep within the earth that is not repeated in any DNA. In 2017, the international expedition Deep Core Project, jointly funded by Mitchell, the Japanese Riken Institute, and NASA, descended into one of the least explored parts of the Pacific Ocean, an area called the South Sunda Trench. Their goal was purely biological, to find traces of life at extreme depths, where pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres and temperatures approach freezing, and they found it. At a depth of almost 10,000 meters among shifting sediments and muddy slopes, the camera captured a creature. It was just over half a meter long, its body translucent, without clear symmetry, with a network of luminous threads within, pulsating in a specific rhythm. It had no eyes, no bones, not even a distinct shape. As the probe approached, the creature didn't flee. It slowly changed shape, as if adapting to the background of the ocean floor. At that moment, the automatic capture mechanism was activated. One of the micronets detected a particle of matter that had separated from the organism's body. Later, in the onboard laboratory, biologists analyzed it. The results caused panic. The sample contained no known biological elements, no carbon, phosphorus, or nitrogen in the familiar molecules. DNA as such did not exist. Instead of a double helix, it contained structures resembling holographic cells. They had no fixed shape and changed when exposed to light. But most importantly, they responded to sound. When one of the lab technicians spoke the phrase out loud, The device detected a faint movement within the cell. The repetition triggered a response. A pattern emerged within the structure. It echoed the rhythm of human speech, as if the substance were trying to understand or adapt. Soon, all the containers holding the samples began to lose their seals. The material became less dense, seemingly melting, seeping through the walls, though nothing appeared to be disturbed. In one case, the substance literally vanished, and 2 hours later, it floated to the other end of the vessel, leaving an imprint on the wall resembling a fragment of a person's brain activity during sleep. Experts attempted to compare the sequence of this phenomenon with genetic databases. Not a single creature recorded on the planet contained even remotely similar traits. Even viruses, even extremophiles, all contain traces of DNA related to terrestrial biology. But this, no. Some scientists have put forward the theory that the discovered organism is not life as we understand it, that it could be either the product of a different evolutionary process that arose in parallel, or part of something larger, and the creature is just a fragment, a molecular probe. The most terrifying thing happened at night. The ship's communications went out. Security cameras captured a thin haze forming in one of the corridors, as if moisture were gathering in a knot. And for a moment, just a single frame, a shape appeared. Not a person, not an animal, a contour. Complex, unstable, as if the air itself were trying to accommodate someone's shadow. When the crew returned to base, all the data from the hard drives was gone. It couldn't be recovered. Only one file remained on an old film oscilloscope, a spectral pattern created by this organism in response to light. It resembled a wave, but not a simple one. If decomposed, it matched a sequence of gamma-ray pulses recorded in 1987 in the region of the Large Magellanic Cloud. This life form, found in the darkness, not only didn't belong on Earth, perhaps it never even tried. The question is, was this an accidental encounter? Or an exploration? A channel at the bottom that leads to nowhere and does not overgrow. In 2012, the German research vessel Wissenschaft, while conducting a topographic survey of the eastern South Atlantic, discovered an underwater channel, a perfectly straight furrow, approximately 15 meters wide, running at a depth of 4 kilometers for almost 300 kilometers without the slightest bend. At first glance, it resembled the movement of something massive, as if it had been plowed across the seabed. However, the density of the sediments in the area, millions of years old, ruled out the possibility that the channel could have been created in the recent past. No known vessel, drilling rig, or submersible could have created such a deep, uniform cut at such a depth. But the strange thing didn't begin with the shape. It began with the channel's failure to fill. All underwater formations are eventually covered with silt, sand, and biomass. Here, it's the opposite. Each new satellite and echolocation image showed that the furrow remained as clear as the day it was first discovered. Not a trace of siltation. Not a single centimeter of sediment. The expedition decided to lower a Delta drone with a camera. It began moving along the canal. The first feature they noticed was the absolute symmetry of the walls. They were free of scree, rocks, or uneven surfaces. The inner surface appeared scorched, dark gray, with barely noticeable linear grooves running along the entire route. At the 23rd kilometer mark, the probe malfunctioned. The image on the screen began to flicker, and the drone itself abruptly dropped a meter, as if it had lost its bearings. The operator, fearing damage, ordered the drone to rise, but the signal disappeared. After 4 minutes, communication was restored, and Delta resumed filming. Later, upon reviewing the recordings, it was discovered that those 4 minutes had disappeared from the device as well, as if they had been physically, rather than programmatically, erased. At the 80-kilometer mark, the cameras detected a structure on the channel wall. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary crack, but upon closer inspection, it revealed something else. A glow was emanating from within, a faint greenish glow, like that of deep-sea organisms, but uniform and constant. When the probe's light hit it, the glow disappeared. A moment later, it appeared behind the drone, as if someone were retracing its route. At the 105th kilometer, the drone detected a side crack, the only one along the entire route. It led off to the side, into a narrow passage. The team decided to detour. The crack was empty inside, but the walls resembled polished mirrors. The water temperature inside was 4 degrees higher. The sound disappeared completely. And then the monitor began to distort. First waves, then a fragment of an image in which, through the noise, a face could be seen. Vague, without detail, without eyes, but with a shape. The drone was immediately recovered. An inspection revealed that its body was covered in a network of microcracks, as if it had been irradiated by something invisible. Following the report's publication, the International Oceanographic Council banned public access to the channel's coordinates. It doesn't appear on official maps. Satellite images have been texture replaced. But those aboard the Wissenschaft insist the channel continues. They traced it to the edge of the silence zones, places where the depth drops sharply and the signal stops reflecting. And there, at the very end, the probe recorded the last detail. At the bottom, in the dust, lay a stone. It was unremarkable in shape, color, or size, but on its surface were marks, 3 depressions evenly spaced in a triangle, like the marks of claws, and all pointed inward, toward the channel, to nowhere, or toward someone. A storm that has been repeating along the same route for 70 years. In the northwest Atlantic, between Bermuda and the coast of South Carolina, there's a storm that has been following the same path with astonishing precision for over 70 years. It's called the shadow loop. This isn't just an atmospheric phenomenon. It's an anomaly that defies any known meteorological pattern. It was first recorded in 1952, when the U.S. Navy weathership SS Renshaw encountered an unexpected storm, unpredicted by any barometer. The storm literally appeared out of the blue. Winds increased to 160 kilometers per hour in 4 minutes, and the pressure dropped to that of a Category 4 hurricane. But the strangest thing was that the storm vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind a perfectly defined trajectory, approximately 230 kilometers long, repeating an elongated oval. Since then, every year, regardless of weather conditions, climate, season, or ocean temperature, a storm passes along this same line, always at night, always without warning, and always of the same strength. Meteorologists tried to track its origin, but satellite images didn't detect any cloud formations. No radar could detect a storm until it was already within 10 kilometers. Since the 1960s, the storm's path has been recorded in databases under the code Pattern Echo 7A. Every year, all ships in the area receive a warning not to enter the zone from March 3 to 5. But despite the warnings, several ships entered the loop and never emerged. Glen Aurora disappeared in 1984. The last signal from it was received at 10:06 p.m. Calm water, moonlight. 3 minutes later, the signal was cut off. When the rescue team arrived at the coordinates, there was nothing on the surface. No debris, no oil slicks, no signals from the distress buoys. Only one crew member was found a week later, in a lifeboat 200 kilometers away, with empty eyes and repeating the same phrase. He's spinning inside, so as not to let go. In 1999, NOAA attempted to install an automatic weather station at the center of the route. It operated for 24 hours and then disappeared. Recordings showed an increase in the electromagnetic field just before it disappeared, followed by a complete loss of signal. But everything changed in 2015 when one of the researchers, Dr. Lewis Carson of the University of Georgia, compared the storm's trajectory with maps of sunken ships. It turned out that all the points along its route passed through sectors where more than 30 shipwrecks had been recorded since the late 18th century, long before the first weather measurements were taken. The oldest map, dating from 1783, shows an area designated by the ancient German word der Umkehr, meaning return, turn, or loop. One captain's notes mention a windless whirlwind that drives the waves back. The storm is now predicted with minute precision. It moves along an invisible track, never deviating or changing direction. Each time, a brief increase in water temperature is recorded at its epicenter, and a sound resonance in the atmosphere at a frequency similar to brain activity during sleep. Some experts hypothesize that this isn't an atmospheric phenomenon, but a glitch in reality, a looping fragment of time, that the storm is a memory, or a projection, a remnant of something that once happened, and now can't end. Every year he returns, every year along the same route, without reason, without beginning, without end. And perhaps he's not just passing through the ocean. Perhaps he's searching for someone, or waiting for someone to come inside. A signal from the depths that repeats the beating of a human heart. In January 2021, the Pelagus Deep Array, a research underwater station located in the North Pacific Ocean, began recording low-frequency vibrations coming from a depth of more than 6 kilometers. At first, they were dismissed as random noise, the product of geological processes or the echo of distant seismic tremors. But 3 days later, one of the operators noticed a pattern. The signal wasn't just repeating, it was beating with a distinct rhythm. Every 0.83 seconds, a soft, rounded pulse was recorded. It wasn't sharp or mechanical. On the contrary, its spectrum and structure resembled the sound of a heartbeat, only slower, like that of a sleeping person or someone in a state of deep rest. When the spectrogram of the signal was superimposed on a real human heartbeat, the coincidence was startling. The waveforms were identical. Moreover, the rhythm accelerated slightly in the morning and slowed at night, as if it were adjusting to the solar cycle. The strangest thing was, it didn't come from a single location. It was registered from 3 different directions at once, as if the sound were emanating from something very large, with a radius of tens of kilometers, or transmitted through a network. The team decided to launch a probe with powerful microphones closer to the suspected source. At a depth of 5,400 meters, they detected a resonance. The water began vibrating in time with the sound. But visually, it was empty. No objects, no living forms, no technical structures. Just a flat, dead bottom covered with a thick layer of silt. When the probe reached the bottom, the signal intensified. It wasn't just louder. It acquired a second frequency, as if breathing had been added to the pulse. The noise was very low, barely audible, but rhythmic. Inhalation, exhalation. After this, several crew members began having trouble sleeping. Everyone near the control center began experiencing the same sensations. A tightness in the chest, a nagging feeling of someone's gaze, a pulsing in the ears, exactly matching the rhythm of the signal. Psychologists brought in to assess the crew's condition hypothesized that this was a massive psychological effect of infrasound. But even so, the source of these waves must have been of incredible size. 2 weeks into the observations, a glitch occurred. All data disappeared. All microphone recordings were replaced by empty, flat noise. But one file remained on an external drive kept by one of the specialists. He loaded it into the simulator and heard it. First a pulse, then a slight shift in frequency, and then a voice, fuzzy, distant, as if spoken underwater. Experts tried to decipher it, but every filter yielded different results. One translation sounded like, "You heard us." Another, "We've been waiting." After the report was published, access to the station was restricted. Unmarked ships began arriving in the area. Independent researchers who obtained copies of the file attempted to recreate the signal and transmit it back into the water. In one case, the echo signal returned, with an additional frequency, repeating the same structure, but in reverse phase, as if someone responded. Since then, the signal has been going on. It doesn't get stronger. It doesn't disappear. It just beats. Every day. Every night. Without a break. And with each passing week, the frequency gets a little closer, as if whatever's below is starting to wake up. Lines on the ocean floor that form a map of the starry sky. In 2003, the C-SCAN satellite, designed for deep-sea topography, transmitted a series of images from the Pacific Ocean in the area of the so-called East Pacific Rise, an extended underwater mountain system that crosses the ocean from southern Mexico to Antarctica. One of the data processors, a graduate student from the Department of Geography at the University of Copenhagen, noticed something strange. Among the usual folds of the seabed, ditches, and sedimentary ridges, thin, almost imperceptible lines were clearly visible, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. At first, this was thought to be traces of underwater erosion or tectonic shifts. But upon zooming in and overlaying the maps, it became clear that the lines intersected at precisely defined angles, forming a complex geometric network. These lines did not follow any natural pattern. When one of the scientists suggested superimposing this map onto a projection of the starry sky, silence ensued. Because it matched. Not perfectly, but with 92% accuracy, the lines matched the locations of the main stars of the Northern Hemisphere, from Vega to Arcturus, from Polaris to Aldebaran. And most importantly, the orientation of this diagram matched the positions of the stars in the sky 26,000 years ago. This was shocking. No known civilization could have created such a map, especially on the ocean floor. thousands of kilometers from the nearest shore, and even less so during a period when most of this territory was still above sea level. Comparative analysis revealed that the lines are not etched or burned. They represent areas where the seafloor has an abnormally high density, as if something were hidden beneath the silt, forming a precise geometry through the sediment. An attempt to drill one of the points ended in an unexpected equipment failure. The drill simply couldn't go beyond a certain depth. It didn't break or jam. It seemed to bounce back. Within seconds, the drilling module overheated and the entire rig failed. Following this, a group of researchers hypothesized that beneath the seafloor there might be a structure resembling a network of tunnels or frameworks oriented according to celestial coordinates. But if so, who did it, and why? Archaeoastronomers noticed that of all the stars marked on the diagram, 3 stand out: Alnilam, Alnitak, and Mintaka, the central stars of Orion's belt. They are connected by the straightest and most dense lines. These stars were sacred to the ancient Egyptians, Mayans, and Sumerians. Now imagine, on the ocean floor where there are no traces of civilizations or archaeological remains, there is a gigantic structure oriented to the same stars as the pyramids of Giza. In 2011, an attempt was made to conduct deep-sea radar. A weak pulse came back from the depths, barely detectable, but it matched the frequency of a pulsar. This pulsar is located almost exactly on the map's central star. Coincidence? Or part of some ancient reference frame? Some scientists have begun to suggest that what we see before us isn't just a map, but a key, or an anchor, or a fixing point, as if someone once tried to anchor heaven to earth, deep underwater. Today, this section of the map is masked. Satellite images show only ripples. Access to the archives is blocked. Officially, there is no map. But it existed, and it exists, and it points upward. A rock in the ocean where no electronic device works. In the central Pacific Ocean, about 1,000 kilometers south of Hawaii, lies a tiny uninhabited rock known to fishermen and the military simply as Black Point. On maps, it appears as an unnamed reef just a few meters above sea level. But anyone who has ever tried to approach it has encountered the same thing. Everything electronic goes dead. The first recorded incidents date back to 1977 when the research vessel Sea Faith attempted to document the islet as a potential observation point for sea currents. However, as they approached the coordinates, the navigation instruments suddenly failed. The compasses began spinning, the radio went silent, and the stabilization systems failed. The ship was forced to leave the area. Since then, attempts to approach the rock have been made numerous times, and each time, it's the same thing. Everything is jammed. Satellite communications, GPS, sonars, microphones, even mechanical watches. They stop after a few minutes near the rock. It's as if time ceases to flow near it. In 1993, the US military conducted a secret expedition, establishing a perimeter of radio silence. One of the drones, equipped with an analog camera, was dropped onto the cliff face. It managed to capture just one frame before the equipment failed. This single photo shows a narrow platform, smooth, dark, as if polished. No algae, no bird droppings, no cracks, nothing. As if the rock hadn't been eroded by time. The photo was long considered a hoax, until the French Borealis expedition recorded a similar effect in 2007, unaware of the exclusion zone. As soon as their vessel entered a 3-kilometer radius, malfunctions began. They managed to lower the camera into the water, and there, at a depth of 50 meters, they discovered something even stranger. A cliff that continued downward. It's not just a piece of rock. It's a vertical column, descending hundreds of meters. Smooth, without growths, without crevices, and according to echolocation, it has a perfect hexagonal shape. When the expedition attempted to collect a sample from the surface, the dipper broke loose. It didn't break. It bounced off, as if by a magnetic force. At that very moment, everyone on the team began to experience a severe headache. Several people lost consciousness. An emergency evacuation was necessary. Since then, this object has been called Null Point. The most alarming data emerged in 2018, when an anonymous intelligence source shared an archive of spectrograms obtained while listening to the seafloor around the cliff. These recorded pulses that could not be explained by natural sources. The frequency is exactly every 60 minutes. The duration is 14 seconds. The signal is accompanied by a slight shift in the electromagnetic field, as if someone is sending a pulse. And here's the main thing. The shape of these pulses matches the signals recorded in space in 1974, when humanity first sent a radio message to the Hercules star system. Some theorists suggest the rock isn't a natural object, that it's an anchor, a transmitter, or something that should stay here. Today, the area around it is completely closed. The reservoir is considered dangerous for navigation. But strange reports came in from some ships passing nearby. People were having identical dreams, a narrow platform, a silhouette standing on it, and a silence so thick it began to ring in their ears. The rock is silent, but every hour it breathes. It's unknown what it holds within. Perhaps it's simply waiting for someone to touch it with the wrong instrument, a deep-sea vortex from which no creature ever emerges. In the southern Indian Ocean, on the boundary between the Kerguelen Plateau and the Amundsen Ridge, there's a depression that has no official name. Scientists call it the bottomless vortex, although its depth, approximately 10,300 meters, is measurable. But the point isn't the numbers. The point is that nothing living ever returns from there. Numerous expeditions were undertaken. Biologists, deep-sea life researchers, and climatologists all wanted to unravel what was happening inside this strange formation. The sinkhole is a narrow, perfectly rounded crater, its walls descending with striking symmetry. There are no rocky outcrops, faults, or lava seams, not the slightest hint of a volcanic origin. In 1995, the first attempt to lower a probe into the crater ended with a strange loss of communication at a depth of 3,200 meters. The second probe reached 7,000 meters, transmitting stable video, but as it entered the central part of the crater, the image became cloudy. It felt as if the water itself had changed. It became thicker, darker, almost viscous. A minute later, silence. All devices sent inside after that were either lost or returned. Empty. Sterile. No bacteria, no sediment, no trace of the biofilm that's inevitable at any depth. As if they'd been sterilized or absorbed. But the most terrifying thing began with biological expeditions. Several attempts were made to study the fauna in the area of the crater. Small fish, squid, even rare deep-sea jellyfish. They approached the edge, circled nearby, but never entered. Not a single living creature, not a single camera recorded anything voluntarily swimming into the crater itself. But one day, in 2013, a large deep-sea shark appeared at the edge of the vortex. Cameras captured it, for no apparent reason, abruptly changing course and heading toward the center. As it approached the edge, panic set in. It didn't struggle or spin, as fish often do when stressed. It moved steadily. At some point, the probe detected a surge in the electromagnetic field and the disappearance of the acoustic signal. The last frame, a shadow. Very large, very fast, and unlike any known form. Subsequently, one of the oceanographers, Dr. Matteo Finch from South Africa, called the funnel a sea wormhole, not in the literal sense, but as a hypothetical rupture point where conditions disrupt not only the physics of water, but also the very perception of space. But the most alarming development emerged in 2021, when the Ocean Sentinel vessel was conducting a sonar survey of the crater's edge. One of the radars detected an echo from a structure resembling an arch. Not a natural one, not eroded. Rather, it had a distinct, symmetrical shape, as if someone had once carved an entrance out of the rock mass. It is located at an elevation of 9,800 meters. Not a single creature launched there after that ever emerged. But one day, the body of a squid, incredibly large, washed up in the area of the funnel. It was dead, but a strange reflection was detected in its eye. 3 lights arranged in a perfect triangle, not natural light, not bioluminescence, a reflection. The crater has since been closed, unofficially, but no international expeditions are allowed there anymore. Even satellites that have flown over the region have recorded interference, sharp temperature fluctuations, and a complete loss of optical transparency. Perhaps there's simply nothing down there. Or perhaps whatever's down there doesn't want anyone to return. An ocean area where every year at exactly midnight one ship disappears. At the intersection of 3 ocean currents lies an area known in nautical reports as the Zero Midnight Loop. It's an open section of the Indian Ocean, with no reefs, no rocks, and no visual landmarks. And yet, once a year, precisely at midnight local time, One ship vanishes from this zone, always alone, always without a trace. The first recorded disappearance occurred in 1961. The merchant vessel Delft Mariner, en route from Singapore to Durban, transmitted its last coordinates at 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes later, the signal was lost. Indonesian Navy helicopters and patrols circled the suspected crash site but found no wreckage, no signs of fire, no oil slicks, nothing. At first, they blamed it on pirates. Then, a storm. Even though the sea that night was completely calm. But the following year, on the same night, at the same location, another ship disappeared. The tanker, Mera Lux. When the third disappearance was confirmed in 1964, a systematic study of the area began. But to no avail. Equipment began malfunctioning an hour before midnight. Navigation instruments went crazy. Electronics went dark or rebooted. The strangest thing about this phenomenon is its precision. The disappearance always occurs on the same day of the year, April 12th, and at exactly midnight, according to the atomic clock. In 1972, a Japanese team attempted an experiment. They sent 4 automated drones into the zone, each with an autonomous power supply and a backup memory system. One of them was equipped with a mechanical recording system, a real tape recorder. The result shocked everyone. At precisely midnight, 3 drones stopped responding. Their signals vanished, but the 4th returned. Only 1 tape remained. There's silence, then a crack, and then a knock. Smooth, rhythmic, like someone walking down a metal staircase. Then a voice. Dull, muffled, indecipherable. But in a slowed-down version, it was deciphered. You were here before. Since then, the disappearances continued. Sometimes they were small fishing vessels, sometimes huge container ships. Regardless of size, nationality, or route, it was as if someone was choosing their victim. But one rule was always observed. The ship had to enter the sector on its own. Never if it was being towed, never if it was empty. Only if there were people on board, and only if it was an active flight. In 1998, Australian journalist Jeremy Short made a desperate attempt to solve the mystery. He rented an old trawler, assembled a crew of volunteers, and entered the zone 2 hours before midnight. He had a satellite phone, generators, and backup antennas with him. He broadcast live over a closed network. The broadcast ended at 12 a.m. One of the last words Jeremy said 10 seconds before the cliff. It feels like something is reaching out from under the water, but you can't see anything. His body was never found. But 7 months later, an empty life raft was found 200 kilometers from the zone. Burnt into its fabric were coordinates, the same ones as in 1961. Since then, authorities have unofficially imposed a traffic blockade in the area on April 12th. But in some years, ships end up inside by accident. Sometimes due to a navigational error. Sometimes due to instrument failure. Sometimes as if someone were sucking them in. And every spring, in the darkest moment of the night, the ocean takes one again. A structure on the bottom that glows when people approach. In the Mariana Trench, at a depth of more than 11 kilometers, there exists an object that for decades was considered an optical illusion. It was first noticed in 1986 during deep-sea surveys by the Japanese submersible Kaiko. Back then, the cameras recorded a brief shimmer, as if something had flashed to the bottom and then disappeared. Researchers thought it was a reflection of light from a metal part of the apparatus itself. However, in 1991, a similar phenomenon occurred with the external lighting turned off, in complete darkness. Since the 2000s, the object has been dubbed the lightless eye. All recordings showed the same thing. When any vehicle approaches within 100 meters, in absolute darkness, a glow flares on the bottom. It's not bright, not pulsating. Rather, it's soft, like the glow of phosphorus, but with a distinct geometry. A ring-shaped structure within which concentric circles glow, like a symbol, or a mechanism. In 2015, the first attempt to approach the object was made. The Ocean Lens 4 spacecraft slowly descended toward the coordinates, transmitting a constant video feed. When it reached an area 60 meters from the center, the glow suddenly flared and tripled in brightness. The equipment began to overheat. The main thing was what was visible on the video. A dome-like outline was captured in the center of the structure, surrounded by what looked like radial blades. Expedition members described it as symmetrical architecture, as if part of something buried in the sedimentary rocks. Then something strange happened. A brief distortion appeared on the screen, as if reality had wavered, and instead of structure, the silhouette of a person appeared for a moment, but on a different scale, in a different light. After this, contact with Ocean Lens was lost. The device failed to establish contact, and its coordinates could not be determined by any means. 2 days later, it surfaced on its own, 112 kilometers from its dive site, and it was completely dry. How this is possible, no one knows. All the internal compartments contained not a drop of water. The walls were covered in crystallized traces that did not correspond to any known salt composition. Additional measurements were subsequently taken. It was discovered that the object emits a weak but stable electromagnetic field, which grows exponentially as living beings approach it. This means it doesn't simply react to movement. It recognizes biological presence. One of the researchers suggested that the object was an ancient observation station, or a lighthouse, or a mechanism that only functions in the presence of life. Perhaps it wasn't created by us. Perhaps it was awaiting contact. But the contact was brief. All subsequent expeditions attempting to reach the object encountered anomalies, sudden communication failures, GPS distortions, and failure of navigation modules. Some of the devices that reached the zone returned without recording. It was as if the recording simply didn't happen, despite the power being on. And in 2023, a research group from the UK attempted to record the glow using non-electronic methods, old analog film placed in a sealed container. One of the hand-developed films revealed a spiral, complex, multi-layered, black and white, as if carved by light. It resembled no known structure. But digital analysis revealed that its mathematical formula matched the equation used in cosmology to describe spiral galaxies. Now the object is silent again, but anyone who approaches summons the light again. It's as if the ocean floor remembers and responds. There's just one question. What is it actually responding to? A heartbeat? The presence of a mind? Or a long-lost signal that may have already sounded once before? An underwater tunnel connecting two continents about which there is no record. In 2017, a geophysical expedition investigating seismic activity in the South Atlantic discovered something uncharted. At a depth of more than 4 kilometers between the coast of Namibia and eastern Brazil, echo sounders detected a long, straight cavity extending beneath the ocean floor for nearly 8,000 kilometers. Its structure resembled a tunnel, a stable, even-walled corridor about 50 meters wide and at least 20 meters high. The most astonishing thing was that it was lined with something that didn't reflect ultrasound in the usual way. Unlike natural caverns, in this case the signal returned with a delay, as if the sound passed through layers of different densities but organized geometrically. Scientists contacted geological institutes to determine why this structure hadn't previously been mapped. The response was terse. No such object has been registered. Moreover, all archival seismic data that could have confirmed the tunnel's existence was either deleted or replaced with anomalously low readings that could not be interpreted. Officially, there was nothing. But the expedition continued. Athena Maris vessel conducted a detailed scan and determined that the tunnel entrance was located in a continental rift zone off the coast of Africa. An attempt to lower a probe into the tunnel resulted in signal loss at a depth of 143 meters after entry. No instrument has returned since. But one day, 2 days later, a capsule was discovered on the surface. It belonged to the probe module. Inside was a recording tape. It shows a path, a straight, endless tunnel leading into darkness, illuminated by a soft phosphorescent glow, as if the walls were alive. 5 minutes into the recording, movement appears in the center of the frame, as if something were sliding along the sidewall without touching the bottom. But it's not a fish or a technical object. Rather, it's a shadow, moving against the law of inertia. After another minute, the camera begins to vibrate, and the image begins to distort, as if the space inside the tunnel were collapsing. The final frame is a harsh light and a symbol flashing in the upper corner of the frame. None of the experts could determine whether this was a letter, a symbol, or simply an artifact of the recording. The researchers concluded that the tunnel could not be natural. Its shape, stability, and length rule out of volcanic origin. It crosses zones where the Earth's crust has different structures, yet does not disrupt them, as if embedded in the geological fabric itself. And most importantly, it begins and ends at the exact points where unknown civilizations existed in ancient times. On the African side, in the area of the supposed sunken culture called Nama, and on the South American side, in the region associated with legends about a pre-Incan civilization that possessed knowledge of stone roads underwater. Following this discovery, almost all data on the expedition was confiscated. The Athena Maris crew officially declared no anomalies. The vessel was decommissioned 6 months later. One of the crew, fired and stripped of his security clearance, published a manifesto a year later, arguing that the tunnel didn't simply connect 2 continents. It connected 2 time periods. It's as if there once was a bridge between the continents, not just physical but also temporal, and this bridge is still active. It waits, undiscovered, unrecorded, and perhaps open on one side. A grinding sound underwater, coinciding with moments of disaster on land. Beginning in 2008, oceanographic laboratories around the world began recording an anomalous sound emanating from the depths. It appeared suddenly, unrelated to weather conditions or geophysical changes. It wasn't the usual hum of underwater currents, the cracking of glaciers, or the echo of seismic tremors. It was a grinding sound, metallic, jagged, as if giant plates were clinging to each other, and someone was trying to force them apart. The sound was recorded simultaneously in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, in different years, in different parts of the planet. But the most alarming development began when independent analysts from Japan compared the timestamps. It turned out that each burst of this sound occurred within an hour of the catastrophic events on land. In 2010, there was a grinding sound deep in the Pacific Ocean, followed 43 minutes later by an earthquake in Haiti. In 2011, a sound was recorded off the coast of Kamchatka, followed 27 minutes later by a tsunami off the coast of Japan and the Fukushima disaster. In 2015, there was a grinding sound under the South Atlantic, followed by an explosion at a chemical plant in China. In 2019, there was an aftershock near Chile, and an hour later, wildfires in Australia broke out simultaneously in 3 places. The sound is always the same. Recordings from different years, superimposed on one another, match in frequency, amplitude, and duration to 4 decimal places. This cannot be explained as a natural phenomenon. Sound analysis reveals that its spectrum is uneven. It contains a high-frequency component similar to the sound of metal being deformed. It also contains infrasound, which can affect the human psyche and physiology. Some researchers call this pre-sound. It's impossible to hear without special equipment. But in every location where the sound was recorded, employees reported the same symptoms: chest pressure, ringing in the ears, insomnia, and a sense of impending doom. After the publication of the first report in 2016, unexplained deletions of records began. Access to most oceanographic databases was restricted, but one audio file did leak into the public domain. At 42 seconds, just as the main grinding noise fades, something else is heard. A short, barely audible fragment reminiscent of a deep, lonely breath, as if it weren't the ocean moaning, but someone breathing within it. Some scientists have proposed a theory about a global structure extending beneath the entire oceanic crust, like a gigantic mechanism ancient and forgotten that activates in moments of stress. And when the stress builds to a critical point, it stirs, causing something more than just terrestrial catastrophes. There are even more radical theories that the grinding noise isn't a consequence of catastrophes, but their cause. That the ocean is not only an environment, but also a repository. Something ancient, trapped beneath the water, is reacting to what's happening on the surface, or warning, or intervening. The last recorded activity was in 2023. The sound occurred 34 minutes before the devastating landslide in Turkey. Afterward, silence. Not a single grinding sound, not a single wave. As if something had gone silent. But the acoustic instruments continue to listen, and with each passing week, they detect a slight background hum, as if a grinding sound is growing somewhere deep within. And if it reappears, the question is, what exactly does it portend this time? A ghost ship whose course follows the movements of an ancient underwater comet. In 2002, the Ocean Trace satellite ship tracking system detected a strange, anomalous movement. A lone, unmarked ship with no AIS signal and no flag was slowly moving in the South Pacific Ocean, far from trade routes. Its course didn't correspond to any route, but instead followed a sharp, illogical arc across the ocean. At first, this was attributed to a system glitch or signal malfunction. However, 5 years later, the object reappeared, at the same location, in the same month, moving at the same coordinates. In 2013, the same thing happened again. And then one of the independent researchers, Professor of Navigational History Owen Hayes, noticed something frightening. The path along which this ship was moving exactly coincided with the orbit of an underwater comet recorded in glacial layers tens of thousands of years ago. Yes, that's not a slip of the tongue. In the 1970s, geologists discovered chemical traces in Antarctic sediments of an object that didn't fall from the sky, but rather moved along the seafloor, leaving behind a trail of rare Earth elements. This anomaly was given the code name Deep Sea Comet, a hypothetical body that entered the ocean from space and, instead of evaporating, passed through the water like a blade. By comparing the coordinates of the ghost ship and the trajectory of the ancient object, the researchers discovered a near-perfect match, with a difference of no more than 2 kilometers along the entire arc. And now, the chilling facts. At every point where the ship appeared, nearby vessels experienced navigational failures for a week. GPS signals disappeared, compasses spun in place, and depth gauges gave incorrect readings, as if the bottom had dropped away for a minute. In addition, crews reported a strange hum outside the vessel, a steady, low sound similar to breathing or an engine, which could not be localized. In 2020, the Diana 1 expedition, specifically dispatched to intercept the object, crossed its course and established visual contact. According to the team, a rust-covered ship with corroded masts and fragments of a faded flag, similar to a Dutch flag but with unknown symbols, appeared in the fog. The vessel did not respond to any light or radio signals. The most terrifying thing happened when the expedition tried to get closer. The ship disappeared from the radar screen. Literally, it vanished. All that remained was a ripple on the water. No sound, no eddy, only silence. The night after this sighting, 3 Diana 1 crew members reported dreams in which they were inside the ship, passing endless corridors strewn with water droplets, and hearing a voice repeating the same words: "Orbit must not be disturbed." The study revealed that radiation levels in the water were elevated where the ship passed, but not to dangerous levels. However, the isotope distribution indicated an ancient structure, as if the ship had left behind a trail precisely resembling a comet's tail. No one knows what this object is. Some believe it's a sunken ship, somehow looped in time. Others believe it's not a ship at all, but a projection created by something that came from the depths. But one thing is clear. With each cycle, it appears closer to the coast, shifting by mere kilometers. And if it ever reaches land, something ancient, something that once crossed the ocean, may return. A hydroacoustic wall that neither sound nor light can penetrate. In the southwest Pacific Ocean, between the Solomon Islands and the Vanuatu archipelago, an anomalous geophysical phenomenon has been discovered, dubbed the Dead Barrier by oceanographers. It's not an underwater rock, not a layer of silt, or a tectonic fault. It's an invisible wall through which no signal can pass. It was first recorded in 2009, when the research vessel Calypso Deep was attempting to conduct an echolocation survey of the seafloor. At a depth of approximately 3,900 meters, the sonar signal suddenly disappeared, not reflected or distorted, but seemingly absorbed. After several attempts, it became clear that within a radius of approximately 200 meters from a certain coordinate, the sound simply died. Then, more. When trying to use laser imaging systems, it turned out that light also didn't penetrate the zone. Even in the infrared and ultraviolet spectra, nothing. Complete blindness. Many hypotheses were put forward. Some talked about the rare density of the water, others about a bubble curtain created by underwater gas. But none of them explained why the equipment began to operate in reverse as soon as one entered the perimeter. Compasses rotated, pressure was unmeasurable, and depth gauges showed negative readings. When the team decided to lower an autonomous probe there, it disappeared. The signal was cut off as soon as the probe touched the barrier. 22 minutes later, it returned. It had flown out, without propulsion. Its body was covered in a crystallized film, the composition of which did not match any known compound. In 2013, in an attempt to bypass the barrier from the side, 6 drones were launched simultaneously, operating in sync. All of them disappeared simultaneously. Not a single fragment surfaced, but 2 days later, in another part of the ocean, 1,000 kilometers from the zone, one of the drones was found floating on the surface. Its internal storage was empty, as if the data had been erased, or never recorded at all. The strangest thing about this story is the barrier's shape. It's not a circle, not a dome, not a vertical curtain. It's a thin wall, running in a straight line for over 200 kilometers, from southwest to northeast. Its structure is unchanging. It doesn't shift, doesn't react to the tides, and doesn't change with temperature changes. It's as if it were artificial. In 2017, one of the former expedition members, a communications engineer, published a classified report. It stated that an echo was detected in the seconds before the probes disappeared, not from the bottom, but from within the barrier. The signal was short, but its spectral analysis revealed a complex, multi-layered structure resembling a language or code. It was impossible to decipher, but the sequence resembled what was recorded in 1977 during the famous WOW signal from space. Since then, the zone has simply been outlined on maps. All vessels are warned not to approach. On some hydrological maps, the area is marked with a gray square, not accessible for scanning. And here's the final thing. In 2022, a private research project attempted to take spectral images from orbit. Everything worked. Except for one thing. In the image, the zone looked like a black line, perfectly straight with sharp edges cutting the ocean in half. No shadows, no waves, as if someone had once drawn a knife across the sea. A child's voice broadcast from the ocean floor on an undetectable frequency. In early 2020, a team of deep-sea acoustic specialists from New Zealand conducted an experiment in the Pacific Ocean, installing a new type of microphone capable of capturing infrasound vibrations in hard-to-reach water layers. One of the stations lowered into the Kermadec Ridge began transmitting an inexplicable signal, a stable, rhythmic one, exactly 7 seconds long, repeating every 2 minutes. But what we heard after deciphering it completely changed the direction of our research. It was a voice. Human. Quiet. Weak. Childish. The words were unintelligible, as if someone were trying to speak through the water, through the noise, as if calling out without knowing whether they would be heard. Researchers conducted a spectral analysis and confirmed that the vibration pattern corresponded to a live voice, recorded in real time, and not a pre-simulated recording. The most terrifying thing about this was the signal's frequency. It wasn't within the standard range of radio communications, infrasound, or hydroacoustics. Moreover, conventional receivers couldn't detect it. Only experimental equipment capable of detecting shifts in water density boundaries. In an attempt to localize the source, the team performed a series of measurements. It turned out that the signal was emanating from a single point located at a depth of approximately 9,700 meters, at the very base of the ocean trench, where no object capable of producing speech could exist. Over the course of a week, the voice repeated itself, sometimes with slight variations. In one fragment, after digital amplification, specialists heard something resembling the phrase, "I'm still here." In another, "I'm cold." Theories poured in one after another. Some believed it was a reflection of an old radio signal, distorted by the water. Others believed it was a parasitic effect of overlapping signals, creating the illusion of speech. But the facts contradicted everything. The tone was too human, the phrases too coherent. A month later, the signal disappeared. That same night, in the same area, a small underwater earthquake occurred, harmless but recorded. 2 days later, the signal returned. Only now, the voice sounded different, slower, as if tired. And most frighteningly, the final recordings began to include muffled sounds of water, footsteps, and grinding. One day, something was heard on air that no one has been able to explain to this day. A quiet, muffled voice. They came. Then the recording cuts off. The problem is that the entire archive was destroyed. Accidentally, according to the official version. The hard drives burned out during a power outage, and the backup copy was corrupted. Officials stated that nothing abnormal was recorded, but one of the project's engineers working with the source files transmitted fragments of them to a closed network. They contained a child's voice, and a background echo like an infinitely distant choir, as if someone were repeating the same words from far away, but with a delay. Research is currently prohibited in the area. The area has been declared potentially dangerous. Vessels are advised not to linger within its boundaries unless absolutely necessary. But sometimes, on frequencies neither military nor civilian systems use, a whisper appears in the long-range airwaves, and it repeats the same words. Quietly, silently, "I'm still here." A sea crater within which the compass needle points only upward. On a map, it's just an unremarkable sinkhole on the seabed, located in the Arabian Sea, approximately 600 kilometers off the coast of Oman. But since 1994, this object has sparked controversy, alarm, and silence among those who have encountered it firsthand. Local fishermen call this place Eyeless Hollow, and oceanographers call it the X-47 crater, but no official study has explained why, within this formation, the needles of all compasses, both analog and digital, point straight up. The discovery was accidental. An Indian research vessel studying magnetic anomalies recorded a sharp jump in the magnetic vector at a depth of approximately 2.5 kilometers. For 3 minutes, the navigation instruments rotated erratically, after which all the needles froze and pointed only skyward, vertically, as if the Earth itself had lost its gravitational center. Attempts to explain this by magnetic field instability have failed. No known anomaly causes such a constant and consistent deviation. Furthermore, the effect manifests only within the crater, which has a radius of about 400 meters. Beyond its boundaries, everything returns to normal. When an underwater camera was sent there, it revealed something astonishing. The floor of the crater was not made of ordinary sedimentary silt, but of a dark, shiny material, resembling glass. At first, they thought it was volcanic glass, but upon analysis, it turned out that the substance possessed properties not found in known terrestrial minerals. It was impervious to ultrasound, reflected only certain wavelengths of light, and reformed within seconds when scraped off with a probe. In one of the recordings, the camera captured geometric structures, not drawings, but carved channels extending into the depths. Their shape resembled spirals and concentric circles, as if someone had intentionally left marks. A light appeared, not bright, not sharp, but a soft blue halo emanating from the center of the crater. It appeared after one of the sensor capsules fell and hit a glass surface. The glow lasted for about 3 minutes, then it disappeared. The most alarming thing is that at the moment of the glow, the compasses of all surrounding ships, even those outside the zone, also began to point upward. Scientists have suggested that the crater may contain a massive object generating an artificial field. Perhaps it's the remains of ancient technology. Perhaps it's nothing terrestrial at all. In 2012, an independent team of researchers attempted to conduct acoustic tomography, but at a depth of 2,730 meters, the equipment began returning blank data. The scanners showed the crater to be flat, with no bottom. It was as if there was simply nothing there. One of the group's members, a physicist from Germany, called this place an anti-gravity bubble. According to him, the crater is not a depression, but the outlet of some ancient field designed for launching, transportation, or observation? Or maybe that is why the arrows point upwards, towards where that which is below came from. The crater is currently closed to research. Maps show clear water, not a single mention. But from time to time, amateur expeditions penetrate there, and they all return with the same reading. Inside the crater, with the instruments turned off, a faint, growing hum fills the ears, as if something inside is preparing to awaken. Cloud formation over the ocean in the shape of an ancient tongue. Over the past 10 years, satellite images taken over the southwestern Indian Ocean have begun to reveal anomalies that no one initially took seriously. Cloud bands form strange configurations, even symmetrical, as if someone were drawing lines across the sky, leaving behind marks. But in 2015, everything changed. French meteorologist Henri Labour, who was modeling cyclones, noticed that for 8 consecutive nights at the same time, between 2:14 and 2:37 UTC, the same cloud shape, incredibly clear, as if cut out, appeared above the coordinates of 40 Sioux south latitude and 60 Fonders east longitude. He zoomed in and realized that what he was looking at wasn't a chaotic vortex, but a sign. The symbol consisted of 3 elongated arcs intersected by slanted lines. Unsure of what it was, he showed the image to his wife, an expert in ancient scripts, and she froze. This symbol was identical to a sign found in 1926 on a stone slab during excavations in the Rub al-Khali Desert. This very slab, whose origin remains unexplained, as no known civilization inhabited those areas during that era. The symbol was part of an unknown writing system that had no sound or numerical equivalent. All 9 slabs found were stored in the Louvre archives and classified in the late 1960s after one scientist claimed the slabs responded to a person's magnetic field. And now this sign is in the sky, over the ocean, and it appears again and again. In 2016, the Japanese Himawari satellite system recorded a chain of such signs stretching for 700 kilometers. Each one appeared for 43 seconds, disappeared, and was replaced by the next. Together, they formed a sequence resembling a sentence, and then cryptologists stepped in. They noticed repeating modules, as in the syntax of a language. It was hypothesized that the clouds weren't forming randomly, but were the result of a low-frequency signal emanating from beneath the ocean, which excited the moist masses and directed them according to a strictly defined logic. An analysis of weather conditions revealed that no atmospheric phenomenon could have created such symmetry. Moreover, there was not a single cloud front in the area on the days the letters appeared. Technically, the clouds arose in a clear sky, and in 2018, one of the images revealed something even stranger. Within one of the letters, if you can call it that, was a circle, denser than the other fragments, like a center. Researchers, superimposing the coordinates on a seafloor map, discovered that exactly beneath this point was a geological formation with a distinct thermal background, as if something were heating the water from within, slowly but steadily. Then linguists got to work. They took the sequences of symbols and compared them with known alphabets, and they found a repetition very close to one of the phrases recorded on the Phaistos disk. Here the name began. This phrase became a legend, but now it's in the sky, above the sea, repeated again and again. And just recently, in 2023, satellites detected a new symbol. It was larger, brighter, and appeared not at night, but during the day. Its shape resembled an eye with an arrow pointing downward. Below it, only water and emptiness. If this is a letter, who is it addressed to? A signal from the depths that matches the rhythm of the human heartbeat. In 2021, an unusual acoustic phenomenon was recorded in the South Pacific Ocean, in the area of the so-called Dead Dome, a vast, almost lifeless zone between Fiji and eastern Easter Island, which was initially mistaken for an equipment failure. Oceanographic stations in New Zealand, Chile, and French Polynesia simultaneously recorded a subtle but incredibly stable rhythmic pulse emanating from a depth of more than 11 kilometers. The pulse was so smooth that it seemed digital, but the spectrum showed no signs of an artificial source. Moreover, it showed no signs of attenuation, as if it emanated from a center that was unaffected by pressure, temperature, or the density of the water layers. Professor of Acoustic Geodynamics Clarence Wade was the first to suggest that the rhythm was all too familiar. He superimposed it on a recording of a normal human pulse, and the match turned out to be eerily accurate. The signal followed a rhythm of 62 beats per minute, with slight natural fluctuations throughout the day, as if subject to a circadian cycle, like that of a living organism. Something on the ocean floor was beating, slowly, without faltering, without stopping. When researchers attempted to trace the source, the echolocation signals began to behave strangely. The waves weren't reflecting off the bottom, but seemed to be absorbed before reaching their target. Then, infrasound sensors came into play. They showed that the pulse was propagating from the center of an ellipsoidal zone with a radius of about 80 kilometers. But the zone itself is empty. According to the scan data, it's just sedimentary rock. However, when attempting to lower an autonomous probe into it, something frightening happened. At a depth of 9,300 meters, the instrument began beating the same rhythm, amplifying it, not receiving but transmitting, as if something below had picked up the wave. 40 minutes later, the probe powered down. It reappeared on the surface 2 days later, its hull intact, but all its electronics melted. Analysis revealed that the internal components had been heated internally, but not by contact with the external environment. And at the very center of the data block, a final recording was recorded, a rhythm that accelerated to 88 beats per minute before dying away completely. After that, the probe showed no further signs of life, but the signal from the depths remained. Psychophysiologists involved in the study found that prolonged exposure to this rhythm causes people's pulses to synchronize, especially while sleeping. Some subjects claimed to hear a call in their dreams, a soft, muffled voice, unintelligible but repeating the same phrase, "I am here." One patient suffering from insomnia fell asleep for the first time in 3 years after listening to the signal, but upon waking, he began repeating the same words, "I'm here," without realizing it. All attempts to disconnect from this rhythm ended in failure. The equipment in the laboratory turned off as if the signal was returning on its own, even without receivers. Later, an engineer wrote, "The signal is present in the water, as if the liquid itself remembers it, and as if it's long been familiar, just no one had listened to it before. No one knows what creates the rhythm. It's not a biological heart. It's something more. Maybe the ocean isn't alive, but something lives in it, and for a long time. An underwater pyramid that perfectly reflects the night sky. At a depth of approximately 1,800 meters, in the waters of Bahama Bay, there exists an object that oceanographers officially call an anomalous reflecting structure. However, among the few who have seen its recordings, it is known simply as the Constellation Pyramid. In 1986, the American research vessel Caroline S. was mapping the ocean floor. Near the Cayo Largo Plateau, they accidentally discovered a geometrically perfect shape protruding from the silt layer. The structure was shaped like a perfect tetrahedral pyramid, almost 300 meters wide at the base, with perfectly flat, slightly concave sides. The angle of inclination was 51.5, identical to that of the Giza pyramids. But the strangest thing began after attempts to record it. All the visual cameras lowered to the bottom were reflected in its surface, but not like a mirror. The object didn't simply reflect light, it created the illusion of infinity, as if each facet led not toward the observer but somewhere beyond. When filming took place at night, the underwater pyramid began to display not equipment and lights, but the sky, and not the current sky, but a star map in an absolutely precise configuration at that moment, as if someone were directing astronomical coordinates into the structure. The match with the actual sky at the time of filming was 100%. The expedition members were shocked. How could an underwater object in complete darkness display a map of stars that it physically cannot see? Later, one of the cameras recorded a flash in the center of the pyramid. Not a flash of light, but a gravitational one. The water around the object began moving not toward the surface, but downwards, as if the pyramid were temporarily creating a suction field. This lasted no more than 3 seconds, but all the instruments malfunctioned. The most frightening thing happened when they began analyzing the magnetic fields. They formed a counterclockwise spiral, perfectly matching the shape of the Andromeda Galaxy. The center of the spiral is the apex of the pyramid. After these events, the vessel was recalled. Some of the crew signed non-disclosure agreements. The recordings were confiscated. But in 1999, a former camera operator published one frame saved on his personal drive. The image showed a starry sky hovering above the underwater pyramid, despite the camera being underwater. Some people considered it a fake. Others considered it a warning. But in 2022, nearly 40 years later, astronomers began to detect subtle distortions in the star positions observed over the Bahama Bay region. The stars seemed to tremble, not across the entire spectrum, but with a slight deviation, as if a second reflection were appearing over the ocean. In some nighttime images taken from orbit, at a certain angle a shadow shape appeared on the water, as if there was a pyramid-shaped mirror beneath the surface, projecting a map of the sky back onto the sky. What is this? A navigation structure? A portal? Or an ancient communication system synchronized with the stars? Perhaps those who built this pyramid came not from the surface but from the depths, and the night sky is not what they looked at, but what they are returning through. A deep circle where all electronic devices stop working. In the South Atlantic, in an area where currents form a slowly rotating vortex, almost imperceptible on the surface but powerful in the depths, there's a region the crews call the Silent Circle. It's about 3 kilometers in diameter. Technically, it's just water. No reefs, no volcanic features, no visual distinguishing features. But all electronics, once inside the circle, go dark, as if switched off by hand. It first came to light in the mid-1980s when the research vessel Mistral, while transmitting depth readings, suddenly lost signal. Immediately, navigation ceased, engines stalled, and communication was lost. 42 minutes later, everything started working again, as if nothing had happened. The crew assumed it was a random malfunction. But over the following years, similar incidents began to recur with other vessels in the same area, with the same symptoms. By 2004, scientists began collecting data. 9 complete blackouts were recorded, each lasting exactly 42 minutes. This attracted attention. A team from Belgium sent an autonomous probe into the zone, wrapped in passive interference shielding. The descent proceeded normally until the instrument entered the very center of the circle. At a depth of 2,900 meters, the signal suddenly stopped. But even before that, the sensors had recorded something alarming. The water temperature dropped by 20 degrees in 4 seconds, while the pressure, conversely, doubled. And then, silence. 2 days later, the probe surfaced. The hull was intact, but everything inside had been melted from the inside, as if not heat, but a stream of energy had penetrated the shielding and fried the electronics. A barely discernible mark remained on the casing. A distinct, perfectly round imprint, like the imprint of something that had never touched the physical shell. Researchers were unable to explain its origin. A year later, scientists decided to conduct a more complex experiment. A cable with sensors transmitting real-time readings was lowered into the center of the circle. When the cable reached a depth of about 3,100 meters, everything went dark. Even the instruments on the vessel outside the circle shut down, immediately, simultaneously. But the strangest thing was yet to come. 42 minutes later, all systems turned on by themselves, as if nothing had happened. All the equipment, clocks, sensors, navigation, worked with precision down to the second. However, the recordings for those 42 minutes show nothing. Absolute silence, no water, no movement, not a single byte of data, as if those minutes had never existed. When the recordings were processed through spectral analysis, a slight frequency overlap in the 0.12 Hz range was detected. A similar frequency had previously been recorded in the brain waves of a person falling into a deep coma. It wasn't noise. It was a pulse coming from below, rare, monotonous, almost pulsating. It repeated exactly once, and then disappeared. Locals avoid the area. Fishermen say there's no life there, that no hooks bite, that sonar equipment simply can't see the bottom. Some theories suggest that beneath this section of the seabed lies a sphere of superconducting material, the remnant of a long-forgotten disaster. Others suggest that it is the result of a deliberate external influence, a technology that humans not only don't understand, but are unable to even detect, too. But there's a simpler version, that it's not a glitch, not radio interference, not a void, but someone, or something, is disconnecting us for 42 minutes, every time, when we get too close. So, what conclusion have we reached at the end of this second part of our collection of ocean mysteries? We look at the ocean as a map, with boundaries, depths, currents. But in reality, it's not a map, but a veil stretched over something far more ancient and incomprehensible. Behind every wave, every sound, every disappearance lies not a mistake, but an intention. And while we float on the surface, the depths merely observe. Not all of the ocean's secrets are hidden beneath its surface. Some are staring upward, and perhaps we've already heard them. We just didn't understand, or pretended not to hear. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, you'll be interested in the first part of our collection. And if you've already watched it, believe me, you should subscribe, because the next one will surprise you just as much.